Do you remember the heart of the home in the 90s? It wasn't about expensive smart appliances or following a viral trend on a screen. It was a handwritten recipe card, a bread maker humming in the corner, and the ability to make a full family dinner out of just a few pantry staples. But then, the kitchen changed. The recipe boxes were lost, replaced by delivery apps and complex online blogs. That practical, resourceful wisdom seemed to disappear overnight. Today, we are bringing that knowledge back. We're exploring 50 smart cooking tricks and kitchen hacks that every household knew by heart in the 1990s. We have found some incredibly clever shortcuts on this list that the modern world has completely forgotten. Let's see if you're one of the few who still knows how to use them. Please like the video and subscribe to support the channel, and let me know in the comments, what is the one specific meal from your childhood that tastes like home to you? Now settle in, get comfortable, relax, and let the journey begin. Number 1. Freezing leftover coffee in ice cube trays to add to iced coffee without diluting it. It is a humid Tuesday afternoon in mid-July, the kind of heat that seems to hang heavy in the air, slowing down time itself. You're standing in the kitchen, and the only sound is the low rhythmic hum of the refrigerator and the distant muffled drone of a neighbour's lawnmower drifting in through the screen door. The house is quiet. The morning rush of cereal bowls and lost shoes is a distant memory, and the evening chaos of dinner prep hasn't yet begun. This is the golden hour of the afternoon, a small pocket of time that belongs entirely to you. The sunlight is streaming through the window above the sink, catching the dust motes dancing in the air and illuminating the pattern on the vinyl floor. You feel a little drowsy, the heat pressing against the windows making you crave something sharp and cold to wake you up. You don't want a soda, and water just won't cut it. You need a moment of luxury, right here in the quiet of your own kitchen. You walk over to the freezer and pull the handle. A cloud of frosty air rolls out, cooling your face instantly. You reach past the box of rectangular pizzas and the bag of frozen crinkle-cut fries to find a specific, slightly cracked blue plastic ice cube tray. But this tray doesn't hold the usual clear, cloudy ice. It is filled with dark, solid squares of coffee that you poured in there yesterday morning, saving the last remnants of the pot that no one drank. You pop 3 or 4 of these dark cubes into a tall, heavy glass. They clatter against the bottom with a solid, satisfying sound. Next, you pour in the fresh coffee you brewed earlier, which has cooled down on the counter. Finally, you add a generous splash of milk and watch it swirl into the dark liquid, creating mesmerizing clouds of tan and cream. This was a time before there was a coffee shop on every corner. You couldn't just drive 5 minutes to order a venti anything. If you wanted a nice coffee, you had to make it, and you had to be clever about it. There was a specific kind of genius in this simple trick. We all knew the heartbreak of a watered-down iced coffee, that sad, watery layer floating at the top of the glass after 20 minutes. But this method was different. This was the secret weapon of the 90s kitchen. As you carry the glass to the kitchen table and sit down, you take that first sip. It is aggressively cold, rich and strong. And the best part is the anticipation. You know that as those cubes melt, they won't dilute your drink. They will only make it stronger, intensifying the flavour as you linger over it. It feels like a hack, a cheat code for a better afternoon. Holding that sweating glass, watching the condensation bead up and roll down the side, felt like the height of sophistication. It was a small act of foresight, saving yesterday's leftovers to make today better. It reminds you of a time when we wasted less, not because we had to, but because we knew the value of everything. That leftover coffee wasn't trash. It was the building block for a perfect quiet moment in a sun-drenched kitchen, just for you. Number 2. Putting a wooden spoon across a boiling pot to prevent it from boiling over. The sun has gone down early, leaving the kitchen windows dark and reflective against the night. Inside, the room is glowing with warm yellow light, and the air is thick with humidity. It is spaghetti night, a staple of the midweek rotation. The windows are slightly fogged up in the corners, and there is a comfortable, chaotic energy in the room. You can hear the low murmur of the television from the living room, perhaps the theme song of a sitcom starting up, signalling that homework time is over and dinner is almost ready. You're standing by the stove, tasked with the simple but crucial job of watching the water. The big stainless steel pot is humming, vibrating against the burner as the heat intensifies. You watch the water go from still to small bubbles clinging to the sides to a violent rolling boil. It sounds like a heavy rainstorm contained within a metal drum. You dump the box of dry pasta in. The water immediately calms down for a second, then surges back with a vengeance. Suddenly white starchy foam begins to rise. It climbs rapidly up the sides of the pot, threatening to breach the rim and hiss onto the hot burner, creating that terrible burnt smell and a mess no one wants to scrub later. Panic sets in for just a fraction of a second, but you know exactly what to do. You reach for the ceramic jar next to the stove, the one filled with an assortment of ladles and spatulas. You pull out the old wooden spoon. It isn't new, it is stained slightly orange from years of tomato sauce and worn smooth at the handle from 1,000 stirrings. With a calm precision, you lay the spoon flat across the top of the metal pot, bridging the gap from one side to the other. It looks too simple to work. It looks like magic. But as the white foam rises and hits the dry wood, the bubbles pop and retreat. The boil is contained. The crisis is averted without turning down the heat or blowing on the foam. There was something incredibly grounding about that wooden spoon. In a kitchen full of modern appliances, the loud dishwasher, the humming microwave, the electric can opener, this was a piece of technology that felt ancient. It was just a piece of wood, yet it held back the chaos of the boiling water with a quiet strength. Do you remember the texture of that spoon? It was light, yet sturdy. It felt warm to the touch, unlike the cold metal of the silverware. It was a tool that had seen every birthday dinner, every sick day soup, and every holiday feast. Seeing it resting across the pot was a visual signal that everything was under control. The dinner was cooking, the house was warm, and the simple laws of the kitchen were working exactly as they should. Number 3, using mayo instead of butter on the outside of grilled cheese for extra crispy sandwiches. It is a crisp Saturday afternoon in late October. The air outside is brisk and smells of dry leaves, but inside the kitchen it is warm and smells faintly of toast and melting cheese. You have just come inside from the backyard, your cheeks still cool and rosy from the wind. The house is filled with the low-level activity of a weekend. Maybe the washing machine is chugging away in the laundry room, or there is the muffled sound of a football game playing on the TV in the den. You are hungry in that specific hollow way that only happens after being out in the fresh air. You want something hot, salty, and substantial. You pull the heavy cast-iron skillet from the bottom cabinet, the one that's always a little oily to the touch, and place it on the burner. The flame clicks on with a whoosh, heating the black metal. You get out the loaf of soft white bread and the package of individually wrapped cheese slices. But then comes the eternal struggle, the butter. It is sitting in the fridge, hard as a rock. You know if you try to spread it on that soft bread right now, it will just tear the slice to shreds, ruining the structural integrity of your lunch. That is when you reach for the jar in the door of the fridge, the mayonnaise. It seemed strange the first time you saw someone do it. Perhaps your grandmother or a friend's mum. Mayo? On a grilled cheese? It felt like breaking a rule. But you twist the lid off and dip a knife into the creamy white jar. It glides across the bread effortlessly, coating it in a smooth, thin layer without a single tear or crumb out of place. You drop the sandwich into the hot pan. Immediately there is a loud, aggressive sizzle, different from the gentle bubbling of butter. The smell that rises up isn't distinctively mayonnaise-like. It is savoury and rich. You watch as the edges of the bread start to curl up slightly, turning a deep, dark golden brown. Flipping it over reveals the truth. The crust isn't just toasted, it is fried. It is an even, unbroken sheet of gold, crispy and rigid. When you finally slide it onto a paper plate and cut it diagonally, because triangles always taste better than rectangles, the sound of the knife crunching through that crust is audible. Do you remember that first bite? The contrast was everything. The outside was impossibly shattered and crunchy, a savoury shell that gave way to the soft molten yellow cheese inside. It didn't taste like mayo. It just tasted like the best version of a grilled cheese you had ever had. It was a secret kitchen hack that felt like you had cheated the system, bypassing the hard butter to get a superior result. It was the taste of a Saturday afternoon done right. Number 4. Using a slow cooker liner made from a clean oven bag to avoid scrubbing the crock pot. It is a dark, freezing Tuesday morning in February. The sun hasn't even thought about coming up yet. The kitchen floor is ice cold against your socks as you shuffle in to start the coffee. Outside, the world is silent and blue-black, the streetlights humming and reflecting off the piles of snow on the curb. You have to leave for work or school in 45 minutes, and the day ahead feels long before it has even started. You reach into the lower cabinet and heave out the slow cooker. It is heavy, cumbersome, and perhaps patterned with fading geese or harvest vegetables. It lands on the counter with a dull thud. You're planning to make a pot roast, or maybe a chili, something that will fill the house with warmth by the time you return. But even as you pull out the ingredients, a small dread settles in the back of your mind. You're already thinking about tonight. You're imagining the aftermath, the crusty, burnt-on ring of sauce around the edge of the ceramic pot that requires soaking, scrubbing, and more soaking. That is when you open the drawer and pull out the box of oven bags. They weren't technically sold as slow cooker liners yet, or maybe they were just too expensive, so you improvised. You pull out a thin, crinkly sheet of clear plastic. It makes a sharp, rustling sound that cuts through the quiet morning kitchen. You open it up with a snap of your wrists, creating a parachute of plastic, and drape it carefully into the heavy stoneware crock. You press it down into the corners, smoothing it against the cold ceramic walls, and cuff the excess over the rim like a sleeve. Now, you dump in the cubed potatoes, the carrots, the meat, and the soup mix. You put the heavy glass lid on, lock it down, and turn the dial to low. The little red light flickers on. You walk out the door into the cold, leaving the machine to do its work. Fast forward 10 hours. You unlock the front door exhausted. The sun has gone down again, and you are tired to your bones. But the moment you step inside, it hits you. A wall of warm, savoury air. The house smells incredible, rich with onions and slow-cooked beef. The windows in the kitchen are steamed up from the heat of the pot. You eat the meal, comforted and full. But the real magic, the true moment of glory, happens afterward. Everyone else leaves the table and you are left with the clean-up. Usually this is the worst part. But tonight, you simply lift the lid. You gather the corners of that crinkly plastic bag, bunch them together, and lift the entire mess of grease and crumbs out of the pot. Underneath, the heavy ceramic crock is pristine. It is perfectly clean, dry, and untouched. There is no soaking required. No steel wool, no elbow grease. You simply wipe it with a damp cloth and put it away. It felt like getting away with something. In a life filled with chores that never seemed to end, this was one small, victorious shortcut that gave you your evening back. Number 5. Storing brown sugar with a slice of white bread to keep it soft and scoopable. It is a grey Sunday afternoon in mid-December. The sky outside is the colour of steel wool threatening snow, but inside the kitchen is a sanctuary of warmth and light. You have decided to bake cookies, maybe oatmeal raisin or classic chocolate chip. The radio is playing low in the background, perhaps a holiday station, or just the local soft rock hits, and the counter is already scattered with measuring cups, a dusting of white flour and a stick of butter softening on a saucer. You are in the zone, moving through the recipe with a comfortable rhythm. Flour, baking soda, salt. You mix the dry ingredients. Then, you reach into the back of the pantry for the bag of brown sugar. It's been sitting there since Thanksgiving, rolled up and clipped shut with a clothespin. You grab the bag, and your heart sinks. It feels like a brick. It is a solid, unyielding rock of molasses and sugar crystals. You try to squeeze it, but there is no give. You try to chip at it with a butter knife, but you are just creating dangerous shards of sugar shrapnel. The baking momentum comes to a grinding halt. You stare at the rock, wondering if you need to microwave it, or just give up entirely. Then, you remember the trick your mother taught you. You reach for the loaf of white sandwich bread on the counter, the soft, squishy kind in the colourful plastic bag. You take out a single slice. It feels airy and almost damp with freshness. You open the canister or the plastic bag of brown sugar, drop the slice of bread right in with the rock, and seal it back up tight. It feels like a strange offering. Putting bread into sugar seems wrong, like mixing up your food groups. But you leave it there overnight, trusting the process. When you come back the next day to check on it, the transformation feels like alchemy. You open the container and the smell of molasses hits you, rich and sweet. You reach in, and the sugar gives way under your fingers like soft, wet sand. It is perfectly fluffy, ready to be packed into a measuring cup. And the bread. It is now hard as a stone, dried out and curled up. It had sacrificed all its moisture to save the sugar. There was a quiet satisfaction in opening that canister and finding the sugar restored. It was a reminder that the kitchen was a place of chemistry and balance. We didn't throw things away just because they weren't perfect. We fixed them. That rock-hard bag wasn't a lost cause, it just needed a little help. And knowing that secret made you feel like a master of your own domain, capable of fixing the small disasters of domestic life with nothing more than a slice of Wonder Bread. Number 6. Microwaving lemons for 10-15 seconds before juicing to get twice as much juice out. It is high noon on a blistering Saturday in August. The air outside is shimmering with heat, and the sound of cicadas is a constant electric buzz rising from the trees. You're inside the kitchen, barefoot on the cool linoleum, trying to escape the oppressive sun. The screen door is open, letting in the smell of cut grass and hot asphalt, along with the distant shouts of kids running through a sprinkler 3 yards over. You have decided to make fresh lemonade. Not the powdered stuff from the plastic canister that tastes like yellow sugar, but the real thing. You have a pile of bright yellow lemons sitting on the counter, looking cheerful and vibrant against the white tile. You cut one open and try to squeeze it over the glass pitcher. It is tough. The rind is thick, the fruit is stubborn, and your hand starts to cramp as you fight to get more than a few drops of tart liquid out. It feels like a losing battle against the fruit itself. That is when you remember the trick. You take 3 whole lemons, still uncut, and place them on the spinning glass plate of the microwave. It feels counterintuitive to cook fruit you want to drink cold, but you punch in the numbers anyway. Beep, beep, 1, 5, start. You stand there for 15 seconds, listening to the low, steady hum of the machine. The light inside glows yellow-orange, spinning the fruit in a slow, hypnotic circle. When the beep sounds, you open the door and a wave of scent hits you immediately. It isn't just a lemon smell. It is an intensified, heated citrus aroma that fills the entire kitchen. It smells like sunshine distilled into a vapour. You reach in and pick up a lemon. It is warm to the touch, almost hot, and the texture has completely changed. What was once hard and unyielding is now soft and pliable. It feels heavy, bursting with potential. You slice it open, and the difference is instant. The juice practically pours out on its own. You barely have to squeeze. With one gentle press, the lemon gives up everything it has, releasing a flood of cloudy tart liquid into the pitcher. It feels incredibly satisfying, like you have unlocked a hidden reserve of flavour that was previously inaccessible. Do you remember the sound of the metal spoon clinking against the glass pitcher as you stirred in the sugar? The ice cubes cracking as the warm liquid hit them. This trick was a small piece of kitchen physics that made you feel like a scientist. You weren't just making a drink, you were optimizing it. In a time before high-tech juicers were a household staple, this was how we got the most out of what we had, ensuring that not a single drop of summer went to waste. Number 7. Adding a tablespoon of vinegar to cake batter as an egg substitute when you ran out. It is late. Maybe 10 p.m. on a school night. The house is settling down for sleep, the television in the other room has been turned off, and the dishwasher is running its rhythmic swishing cycle. But you're still wide awake in the kitchen, bathed in the harsh fluorescent light of the ceiling fixture. You are on a mission. Tomorrow is a birthday or a bake sale or a special potluck, and you have committed to bringing a cake. The counter is a disaster zone of white powder. There is a dusting of flour on the floor, a smudge of butter on the handle of the refrigerator, and the electric hand mixer is resting on a plate, its beaters dripping with chocolate batter. You're halfway through the recipe, feeling confident, humming along to the silence of the house. Then you reach for the cardboard carton on the middle shelf of the fridge. You grab it, and your stomach drops. It feels wrong. It feels too light. You flip the lid open, hoping for a miracle, but you are met with the sad sight of empty cardboard divots. Maybe there is 1 egg left, but the recipe calls for 3. Panic sets in. The grocery store closed an hour ago. There are no 24-hour delivery apps to save you. You're stranded in your kitchen with a bowl of wet ingredients and a deadline. You stare at the batter, wondering if you can just make a flat, sad brownie instead. But then you pull out the community cookbook, the spiral-bound one with the church group's logo on the cover, or maybe you call your mum on the wall-mounted landline, whispering so you don't wake the house. The solution comes back. Vinegar. It sounds insane. You want to make a rich, sweet chocolate cake, and the advice is to add the sharpest, most sour liquid in your pantry. You hesitate, holding the heavy glass jug of distilled white vinegar. It smells like dyeing Easter eggs or cleaning coffee pots, not like dessert. But you trust the chemistry. You measure out the tablespoon. The clear liquid vanishes into the dark, thick batter. If you listen closely, You can almost hear the tiny reaction as the acid hits the baking soda. The invisible fizz that is going to replace the lift of the eggs. It was often called wacky cake, or depression cake, a relic from hard times that 90s mums knew by heart. You slide the pans into the oven and wait. The smell that fills the kitchen isn't sour, it is pure, deep chocolate. When you pull the layers out, they haven't collapsed. They have risen perfectly, dark and springy to the touch. Do you remember the relief of that moment? Slicing off a tiny crumb just to test it, terrified it would taste like a pickle? But it didn't. It was moist, tender and lighter than the version made with eggs. It felt like a magic trick. You had pulled a celebration out of thin air, using nothing but pantry staples and a little bit of faith in the science of baking. Number 8. Reviving stale chips and crackers by microwaving them for 30 seconds. It is a grey, drizzly afternoon, the kind where the sky is a uniform blanket of white, and the rain taps a steady, sleepy rhythm against the window pane. You're lying on the couch, wrapped in a knitted afghan, watching a marathon of cartoons or perhaps a movie you rented from Blockbuster the night before. The house is quiet, save for the TV and the hum of the refrigerator. You're struck by a sudden, specific craving. You want something salty. You want a crunch. You get up and pad into the kitchen in your socks, sliding slightly on the linoleum. You open the pantry door, scanning the shelves. Past the boxes of pasta and the cans of soup, you spot it. A bag of tortilla chips or maybe saltines sitting on the top shelf. But as you pull it down, you notice the fatal error. The bag wasn't clipped shut. It was just loosely rolled, or maybe left completely open by a sibling who didn't know better. You reach in anyway, hopeful. You pull out a chip and take a bite. The disappointment is immediate. Instead of that sharp, loud crack that echoes in your ears, there is a dull thud. The chip bends. It is chewy, leathery, and sad. It tastes like the air in the pantry. In most cases, this would be the end of the road. The trash can is right there. But you know the secret. You don't throw them away. You grab a paper plate, the flimsy white kind with the ruffled edges, and spread a single layer of the sad, limp chips across it. You place them in the microwave. The door clicks shut and you punch in 3-0 start. You stand there, watching through the mesh window as the plate rotates slowly in the yellow light. It feels like a science experiment. You're trying to reverse time, to pull the moisture out of the grain and send it back into the atmosphere. When the timer beeps, you open the door and a surprising smell wafts out. It smells like toasted corn and warm salt. It smells like a Mexican restaurant. You reach in, and the chips are hot to the touch. You have to be careful not to burn your fingertips. You take a bite of one while it is still steaming. The crunch is back. It is louder and more aggressive than before. The heat has not only dried them out, it has toasted them slightly, bringing out the oils and the flavour. They are better than they were when the bag was first opened. There was something incredibly comforting about eating warm chips on a cold afternoon. It turned a stale, forgotten leftover into a hot snack that felt intentional. It was a reminder of the power of the microwave, which in the 90s still felt like a magical box that could fix almost anything. You go back to the couch with your warm plate, the rain still tapping on the glass, feeling like you just won a small secret victory against the elements. Number 9. Using dental floss to cut perfectly even cake layers and soft cheeses. It is late on a Friday evening. The kitchen table is already covered in a festive mess of half-open party favours, curling ribbon, and a few stray balloons. Tomorrow is the big day, a birthday party for a sibling or perhaps your best friend. The house is quiet, but there is a hum of anticipation in the air. You are the designated baker, and on the counter sits your masterpiece, a tall, round sponge cake that has finally cooled completely. You have a vision. You want to make a layer cake, the kind you see in the magazines at the grocery store checkout. You want a layer of strawberry jam or buttercream right in the middle. But as you pick up the long serrated bread knife, your hand hesitates. You know the risk. If you try to saw through this delicate, airy sponge, the knife will drag. It will pull crumbs, tear the edges, and likely leave you with a lopsided, crumbling disaster that leans like the Tower of Pisa. That is when you head to the bathroom cabinet. You push past the toothpaste and the hairspray to find the small white plastic container. Dental floss, but you have to be careful. It must be unflavoured. No one wants a minty aftertaste in their vanilla cake. You pull out a long, thin strand, stretching it taut between your 2 index fingers like a cat's cradle. You walk back to the cake with the focus of a surgeon. You wrap the floss around the equator of the cake, crossing the ends in front of you. It looks strange, like you're measuring it for a suit. Then, with a slow, steady breath, you pull the ends apart. The thin string tightens, biting into the soft brown crust. It glides through the sponge with zero resistance. There is no friction, no dragging, no crumbs flying everywhere. You watch as the floss disappears into the centre of the cake, slicing through the crumb structure with absolute perfection. When the string comes free, you lift the top half. It is a miracle. The surface is perfectly flat, smooth and level. It looks like it was cut by a laser. Do you remember the satisfaction of that reveal? Seeing the steam still rising slightly from the perfect cross-section? It wasn't just for cakes either. This was the same trick used for that log of soft goat cheese or mozzarella that would squish flat under the pressure of a knife. The floss was the great equalizer, a bathroom staple that became a precise kitchen instrument. It was a moment of pure, practical magic, taking something mundane and using it to create something beautiful, delicate and professional, right there on your kitchen counter. Number 10. Storing fresh herbs upright in a glass of water covered with a plastic bag in the fridge. It is early evening on a Thursday. You have just returned from the grocery store, the trunk of the car filled with brown paper sacks, or those thin, rustling plastic bags that cut into your fingers. The kitchen is bright and the counter is covered in the spoils of your trip. There is a gallon of milk sweating condensation onto the laminate, a box of cereal, and a rotisserie chicken for dinner. But then you pick up the produce bag. Inside is a massive bunch of cilantro or perhaps flat-leaf parsley. It is vibrant, green, and smells sharply of the earth. You bought it for a specific recipe, maybe a salsa or a fancy garnish you saw on a cooking show that afternoon, but you only need a tablespoon. The rest of this lush green bouquet is destined for the crisper drawer. We all knew the fate of herbs in the 90s. You would toss them into that bottom drawer labelled vegetables and forget about them. 3 days later, you would reach in and find a sad, slimy bag of black mush that smelled like a swamp. It was a cycle of waste that felt inevitable, but not this time. You're trying something new. You reach into the cupboard and pull out a heavy drinking glass, maybe one with a painted pattern of geese or flowers on the side. You fill it halfway with cold tap water. You take the bunch of herbs and trim the bottom of the stems with kitchen shears, the satisfying snip echoing in the room. Then, you place the bunch into the glass just like you're arranging a dozen roses from a secret admirer. They stand tall, drinking in the water, but the ritual isn't done. You take the clear plastic produce bag they came in, the one with the twist tie, and carefully invert it over the top of the leaves. You pull it down gently, creating a humid, protective dome. It looks like a space helmet. It looks like a miniature greenhouse sitting right there on your counter. You clear a space on the top shelf of the refrigerator, pushing aside the jar of pickles and the carton of orange juice. You place your little science experiment right in the centre. Every time you open the fridge door for the next week, there it was. A little tower of greenery standing proud among the condiments. The plastic bag would fog up slightly with condensation, proving that it was working, trapping the moisture inside. Do you remember the feeling of reaching in 5 days later? You would lift the plastic bag, and a wave of fresh green scent would hit you. The leaves were still crisp. They snapped when you bent them. They hadn't turned into slime. They were suspended in time. It was a simple trick of botany that made you feel like a master gardener. In a decade where we were just starting to move away from dried spices in little metal tins and embracing fresh food, this trick was the key to making that transition possible. It was a way to keep a little bit of nature alive in the cold electric hum of the kitchen. Number 11. Freezing grapes as natural ice cubes for white wine and juice boxes. It is a sultry Friday evening in late June. The sun is just starting to dip below the fence line, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and apricot orange. You're sitting on the back deck, the wood still warm from the day's heat radiating up through the soles of your feet. The air is filled with the sound of crickets starting their nightly chorus, and the distant splash of a neighbour diving into a pool. It is the kind of evening where you just want to sit still and let the breeze wash over you. You have a glass of white wine sitting on the patio table, maybe a Chardonnay or a Pinot Grigio, the popular choices of the decade, but the heat is relentless. You watch as condensation forms heavy beads on the glass, and you know that within 10 minutes your crisp, cold drink will be lukewarm. Putting regular ice in it feels like a crime. It would water it down, ruining the flavour you waited all week to enjoy. That is when you remember the bag in the freezer. You excuse yourself and head into the cool, air-conditioned kitchen. You open the freezer door and push aside the popsicles to find a gallon-sized bag filled with green or red spheres. They are frozen solid, coated in a delicate layer of white frost. You grab a handful of these frozen grapes. They are hard as rocks and colder than ice. You walk back outside and drop 3 of them into your wine glass. Plink, plink, plink. They sink to the bottom, looking like underwater jewels, elegant and strange. Immediately you see the difference. They chill the liquid from the inside out, but they don't melt into water. They hold their shape. As you sit back and take a sip, the wine is perfectly cold, undiluted and crisp. It felt like the height of sophistication. It was a trick you saw in a magazine, something that made a regular Friday night on the porch feel like a scene from a movie. But the magic of the frozen grape didn't end there. Do you remember the texture? When the drink was finished, you were left with these wine-infused treats. You would pop one into your mouth and the texture was incredible. It wasn't icy, it was creamy, like a miniature sorbet melting on your tongue. And on Monday morning, this same trick served a completely different purpose. You would toss a handful of these frozen grapes into a brown paper lunch bag or a plastic lunchbox. By lunchtime, they had thawed just enough to be soft and juicy, but all morning long, they acted as natural ice packs, keeping the juice box and the ham sandwich cold without the soggy mess of melting ice. It was the ultimate double-duty hack. Sophistication for the adults and practical magic for the kids, all from a single bunch of fruit. Number 12. Keeping a damp paper towel over lettuce in the fridge to extend freshness for days. It is a quiet Wednesday evening. The kitchen is illuminated by the soft golden glow of the stove light. Dinner is almost ready. Maybe it's taco night, or you're just throwing together a simple side salad to go with a casserole. You walk over to the refrigerator and pull open the crisper drawer at the bottom. It makes that distinct plastic-on-plastic rumbling sound as it slides out. Inside sits the head of iceberg or romaine lettuce you bought on Saturday. Usually by Wednesday, this would be a moment of disappointment. You would reach in and find limp, rusty-edged leaves that feel slippery and sad. You would have to peel away layer after layer of waste to get to the usable centre, feeling like you were throwing money directly into the trash can. But not tonight. Tonight, you reach in and pull out a bowl covered with a simple, white paper towel. It looks unassuming, like a napkin left behind after a meal, but as you touch it, it is cool and damp. It feels refreshing against your fingertips. You peel back the paper towel, and underneath the lettuce is shocking. It is bright, vibrant electric green. It looks exactly the way it did the moment you brought it home from the store 4 days ago. You pull off a leaf and snap it in half. Crunch. It is loud, crisp, and full of water. This was the simplest trick in the book, yet it felt like a miracle every time. The ritual was so specific. You would take a single sheet of paper towel, run it under the cold tap, and then squeeze it out with a firm, twisting motion until it was just damp, not dripping. Then you would drape it over the washed leaves like a cool, protective blanket. It was a small act of care. In the busy rush of a week where everything seemed to decay or get used up so quickly, this was a way to press pause. It created a little microclimate right there in your fridge, a personal humidifier for your vegetables. Do you remember the smell when you lifted that damp towel? It smelled like rain. It smelled like a garden. It was a sharp contrast to the usual stale, closed-in odour of a refrigerator. It made the simple act of making salad feel fresh and intentional, rather than a chore of salvaging what was left. It was a tiny insurance policy against waste, a guarantee that when you needed that crunch, it would be there waiting for you. Number 13. Adding a pinch of baking soda to tomato sauce to cut the acidity without sugar. It is late Sunday afternoon. The sun is slanting low through the kitchen blinds, casting long, dusty stripes across the table. The entire house smells rich and heavy with the scent of garlic, oregano, and simmering tomatoes. It is the kind of smell that clings to your clothes and makes your stomach rumble the moment you walk through the front door. On the stove, the big pot is bubbling away, a thick, deep red lava that occasionally pops and splatters a tiny droplet onto the white enamel stovetop. You're standing there with a wooden spoon, playing the role of the chef. You dip the spoon in, blow on the steaming red sauce, and take a taste. Immediately your face scrunches up just a little. It's sharp. It has that biting metallic tang that comes from canned tomatoes, or a jar that wasn't quite expensive enough. It hits the back of your throat with a sour acidity that overpowers the basil and the onion. Your first instinct might be to reach for the sugar bowl. That was the common fix. But you know better. You know that sugar just covers up the problem, turning dinner into something cloyingly sweet that doesn't quite sit right. Instead, you reach for the orange box in the cupboard or the fridge, the baking soda. You pinch just a tiny amount between your thumb and forefinger, a dusting of white powder. You sprinkle it over the bubbling red surface. Immediately the pot comes alive. It doesn't just dissolve, it reacts. A ring of pale orange foam rises up where the powder hit the sauce, fizzing and hissing softly. For a second, it looks like you have ruined dinner. It looks like a volcano science project gone wrong in the middle of your marinara. But you just stir. You swirl the spoon through the foam, watching it fold back into the deep red sauce. As the bubbles subside, the colour of the sauce shifts ever so slightly, becoming a bit more orange, a bit creamier looking. You take another taste. The difference is like night and day. The bite is gone. The sourness has been neutralised, vanishing into a smooth, savoury richness that coats your tongue. It suddenly tastes like it has been simmering for 6 hours instead of 20 minutes. There was a profound satisfaction in that little fizz. It felt like alchemy. You weren't just cooking, you were performing chemistry. It was a secret passed down through generations, whispered from grandmothers to mothers, a way to tame the harsh nature of cheap ingredients and turn them into something that tasted like love. It was the secret weapon that made everyone ask for seconds, wondering why your sauce was just so much better than theirs. Number 14. Microwaving garlic cloves for 15 seconds to make the skin slip right off. It is 5 p.m. on a dark November evening. The windows are steamed up, blocking out the cold blue twilight outside. The kitchen is in full swing, a chaotic ballet of pots boiling, oven doors opening, and the rhythmic chopping of a knife against a wooden board. You're making something hearty, a lasagna, a roast chicken, or maybe a big pot of chili. The recipe calls for garlic. Not just 1 clove, but 4 or 5. You stare at the white, papery bulb sitting on the counter. You know the drill. You break off the cloves, and then the struggle begins. You smash them with the flat of your knife, hoping to loosen the skin, but it clings. That thin, sticky white paper adheres to the clove like glue. It gets under your fingernails, it sticks to your skin. The more you pick at it, the more your fingers become coated in that pungent, sticky oil that you know will linger on your hands for days, no matter how many times you wash them. It is the most tedious, annoying part of cooking. But then you remember the shortcut. You gather the unpeeled cloves into a small pile and scoop them up. You toss them directly onto the floor of the microwave, or maybe onto a small paper plate. You punch in 1, 5, start. You stand back and wait. It is a tiny pause in the frantic energy of cooking. For 15 seconds, you just listen to the hum. You might hear a faint pop or a hiss of steam, but mostly it is just the machine doing its work. When the timer beeps, you open the door. The smell is faint but distinct, earthy and warm. You reach in and pick up a clove. It is hot to the touch, slightly soft, yielding under your fingers, and then comes the magic. You pinch the bottom end of the clove, and the garlic just slides out. It slips free from its papery jacket effortlessly, smooth and clean. There is no picking, no scraping, no sticky mess under your nails. The skin is left behind as a hollow, dry shell, and the clove is naked, pristine, and slightly softened, ready to be chopped. Do you remember how satisfying that tactile sensation was? It felt like shucking corn, but easier. It turned a task that was fiddly and irritating into something that took seconds. The garlic was slightly cooked by the process, making it mellower and easier to mince. It was a moment of pure efficiency, a kitchen hack that saved your patience and your fingertips, letting you get back to the rhythm of cooking without missing a beat. Number 15. Using cookie cutters to make fun sandwich shapes that kids would actually eat. It is 12:30 p.m. on a bright, blaring Tuesday in July. The screen door has just slammed shut for the 10th time that hour, vibrating in its frame. The house is filled with the high-pitched energy of summer vacation. There are kids running through the sprinklers in the backyard, their shouts drifting in through the open window, mixing with the sound of cicadas. Inside, the kitchen is a cool refuge from the heat, smelling faintly of sunscreen and chlorine from wet towels thrown over chairs. It is lunchtime. The hungry horde has descended, demanding fuel before running back out to their water gun fights. You're standing at the counter, facing a loaf of white bread and a jar of peanut butter. You know the struggle. If you just slap together a regular square sandwich, half of it will end up in the trash. They will pick at it. They will whine about the crusts. They will say they aren't hungry, even though you know they will be starving in 20 minutes. You need a strategy. You need to make the food compete with the excitement of the backyard. You open the junk drawer, or perhaps the bottom drawer where the baking supplies live in a jumbled metallic tangle. You dig past the turkey baster and the whisk to find them. The cookie cutters. They were usually reserved for December for sugar cookies and gingerbread men, but today they are being drafted for active duty. You pull out a star, a heart, or maybe a dinosaur if you were lucky enough to have the plastic set. You assemble the sandwich first: soft white bread, creamy peanut butter, grape jelly. It looks mundane. It looks like a chore. Then you take the metal star and center it over the bread. You press down hard. You feel the resistance of the crusts, then the soft give of the middle, and finally the sharp clack as the metal hits the cutting board. You give it a little wiggle to sever the edges. When you lift the cutter away, the transformation is complete. You peel away the outer frame of crusts, the bones of the sandwich, leaving behind a perfect crustless star. Suddenly it isn't lunch anymore. It is a prize. It is a toy you can eat. You arrange them on plastic plates, maybe the ones with the dividers. When you carry them out to the patio table, the reaction is instant. The kids don't see bread and jam, they see fun. They devour the shapes in seconds, eating the points of the stars first, playing with their food in the way you actually wanted them to. And do you remember the secret ritual of the parent in this moment? You didn't throw those crust frames away. You stood at the counter, enjoying the quiet for a moment, and ate the leftovers yourself. That ring of crust with the sliver of peanut butter and jelly clinging to the edge was the mom tax, a little snack you enjoyed while watching the kids run back into the sun. It was a simple geometric trick, but it turned a battle over lunch into a victory, buying you another hour of peace while the kids played, fueled by sandwiches shaped like the things they loved. Number 16, storing opened cereal bags with chip clips and inside the box for maximum freshness. It is 8 a.m. on a Saturday. The rest of the world might be sleeping, but you are wide awake. You're sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, still in your pajamas, maybe the ones with the feet built in, or an oversized t-shirt from a summer camp. The glow of the heavy tube TV is flickering on your face, and the volume is low so you don't wake your parents. It is the golden age of cartoons, a block of time that feels sacred and infinite. In your lap rests the most important meal of the week. It isn't oatmeal or eggs. It is a bowl of sugary, colourful shapes, maybe fruity loops, chocolate puffs, or marshmallows mixed with grains. But the experience of eating it starts long before the milk hits the bowl. It starts in the pantry. You remember the struggle of the cereal box. You would pull it down from the shelf, admiring the bright mascot on the front. You would try to open the cardboard top gently, sliding your finger under the glued flap, but inevitably it would tear. Then came the plastic bag inside. It said, "Tear here," but that was a lie. If you pulled it, the bag would explode down the side, spilling treasure all over the floor and leaving the rest exposed to the air. That is where the system came in. You didn't just leave that bag open to get stale and chewy. You treated it like a vault. You would shake the cereal down to the bottom. Then, you would smooth out the empty top part of the plastic bag, pressing the air out with a flat hand. You would roll it down, tight and precise. 1 fold, 2 folds, 3. It had to be airtight. Then, you reached for the clip. It might have been a generic, colourful plastic clamp, or maybe a promotional one with a magnet on the back that usually lived on the fridge. Snap. The sound was satisfying. It signalled that the contents were secure, but you didn't stop there. You shoved the whole package back inside the cardboard box and tucked the tab into the slot. Do you remember the sound of pouring a bowl from a well-kept bag? It was a loud, clattering rush. The cereal hit the porcelain bowl with a distinct high-pitched ring. That sound meant freshness. It meant that when you added the cold milk, the cereal would fight back. It would stay crunchy until the very last spoonful. There was a specific anxiety to biting into a stale Fruit Loop. That soft, styrofoam texture that felt like disappointment. Using the clip in the box wasn't just about being tidy. It was about protecting your Saturday morning joy. It ensured that next week, when the cartoon started again, the experience would be just as good. It was a small act of discipline that preserved the sweetest part of childhood. Number 17. Freezing overripe bananas in their peels for future banana bread. It is a Wednesday evening, the hump of the week. You're wiping down the kitchen counters after dinner, moving things around to get to the crumbs underneath. You push aside the toaster and the napkin holder, and then you bump into the fruit bowl. It sits in the centre of the table, a wire basket or a heavy ceramic dish. Inside, there is a tragedy unfolding. 3 bananas are sitting there. They are no longer the cheerful bright yellow fruit you bought on Sunday. They have turned. They are leopard spotted with brown, and in some places they have gone completely black. The stems are loose, and the air around them smells intensely sweet, heavy, and almost fermented. In a different life, this would be trash. You would sigh, pick them up by the stems, and drop them into the garbage bin, feeling a pang of guilt about wasting food. But you have a plan. You know that these ugly, mushy fruits are actually diamonds in the rough. You don't peel them. You don't slice them into bags. That takes too much effort for a Wednesday night. Instead, you simply pick them up, soft and squishy as they are, and walk to the freezer. You open the door and toss them in, right next to the ice trays and the box of waffles. They land with a heavy thud. It was a strange form of suspended animation. Over the next few days, those bananas would undergo a terrifying transformation. The cold would turn their skins entirely black. They would look like charcoal. They would look like something that should be studied in a lab, not eaten. But you knew the secret. You knew that inside those blackened, frozen skins, the starch was breaking down into pure, concentrated sugar. Fast forward to a rainy Sunday morning a month later. You want to bake. You remember the stash. You pull those black, rock-hard bananas out of the freezer and let them sit in a bowl on the counter to thaw. They look unappealing, weeping a little bit of sticky liquid as they warm up. But when you finally snip off the end and squeeze the fruit into your mixing bowl, it isn't fruit anymore. It is liquid gold. It is the sweetest, most aromatic banana essence possible. Do you remember the smell of that bread baking? It filled the entire house with a scent of cinnamon, nutmeg, and warm sugar. It was the ultimate redemption arc. You had taken something that looked like waste, something ugly and forgotten on the counter, and turned it into the most comforting, delicious thing in the world. It was a lesson in patience, a promise that even the things we neglect can be turned into something wonderful if we just give them a little time and the right environment. Number 18. Using a pizza cutter to quickly chop fresh herbs, cut quesadillas, and slice brownies. It is a comfortable Saturday afternoon. The kitchen is still warm from the oven, and the air is thick with the smell of melted chocolate and sugar. Sitting on the stovetop is a 9x13 glass pan, filled with a dark, fudgy landscape of freshly baked brownies. They have that perfect, shiny, crackled top that you worked so hard to achieve. You're impatient. You want a square right now while it's still gooey. You pull out a butter knife and drag it through the pan. It's a disaster. The crust shatters, the fudgy middle sticks to the blade, and you end up tearing a jagged, messy hole in the centre of your masterpiece. The brownie clings to the knife like cement, refusing to let go. That is when you look over at the utensil jar and see the round, stainless steel wheel sticking out. The pizza cutter. It was usually reserved for Friday nights and cardboard delivery boxes, but today it finds a new purpose. You grip the handle and line up the wheel at the edge of the brownie pan. You push forward. Zip. The wheel glides through the crust and the dense chocolate interior in one fluid, continuous motion. There is no dragging. There is no tearing. It cuts a perfect, laser-straight line from one end of the pan to the other. You cross-cut the other way, creating a grid of identical squares in seconds. It feels incredibly satisfying, like cutting through wrapping paper when the scissors glide just right. But the innovation didn't stop at dessert. This wheel became the ultimate multi-tool of the 90s kitchen. Do you remember making quesadillas on the stovetop? You would slide the hot, crispy tortilla onto a plate. If you used a knife, the pressure would squash the filling out the sides, making a mess of cheese and salsa. But the pizza cutter? It rolled right over the top, crunching through the toasted tortilla without displacing a single ingredient. And for herbs? Forget the tedious rocking motion of a chef's knife that you hadn't quite mastered yet. You would pile a bunch of cilantro or parsley on the cutting board and just run the wheel back and forth, turning the leaves into confetti in seconds. Using the pizza cutter for everything felt rebellious. It was a tool designed for a specific Italian dish, yet here you were, using it to hack your way through every meal of the day. It was fast, it was fun, and it made the simple act of portioning food feel like a race car driving across a finish line. Number 19. Adding a bay leaf to flour and rice containers to keep bugs away. It is a quiet Sunday afternoon, the kind reserved for chores that no one really wants to do, but everyone feels better after finishing. You're in the kitchen, but not cooking. You are organising. The pantry door is open, revealing shelves lined with boxes, cans, and those mismatched plastic containers that everyone seemed to accumulate in the 90s. The air smells faintly of dust, cardboard, and dried spices. You're consolidating the baking supplies, pouring the remnants of one bag of flour into the main canister. As the white powder cascades down, you pause. You lean in closer. You see something that makes your skin crawl. A tiny dark speck moving against the pristine white landscape. Then another, weevils. It is a specific kind of kitchen heartbreak. It isn't just the waste of throwing away 5 pounds of flour, it is the feeling of invasion. The pantry, your safe harbour of food, has been compromised. You feel the urge to throw everything out and scrub the shelves until your hands are raw. But then, you remember the preventative measure, the old magic. You reach for the small glass jar on the spice rack, the one filled with dried, brittle leaves that are a faded olive green colour. Bay leaves. Usually these were reserved for soups and stews, floating in the pot like little boats before being fished out at the dinner table. But today, they are guardians. You open the new bag of flour or the fresh container of white rice. You take out a single dried bay leaf. It feels like paper in your hand, stiff and fragile. If you snap it, it releases a scent that is subtle, herbal, and slightly medicinal, a smell like eucalyptus and tea. You bury the leaf deep in the centre of the white powder, or perhaps you lay one right on top like a flag. Then you seal the lid tight. There was something about this ritual that felt ancient. It didn't involve harsh chemicals or poison traps. It was just a leaf. Yet, we believed in it completely. We were told that the insects hated the smell, that it acted as an invisible force field around our dry goods. Do you remember opening the flour canister months later? You would scoop out a cup for cookies, and there the leaf would be, still sitting there, silent and vigilant. The flour was clean. The rice was safe. It felt like a small domestic spell you had cast over your kitchen. In a world that was becoming increasingly synthetic, this was a reminder that sometimes the best solutions were the ones that came straight from nature. Protecting your home with nothing more than a dried leaf and a little bit of grandmotherly wisdom. Number 20. Rubbing a cut potato on cast iron skillets to clean them without soap. It is 7:30 p.m. on a Sunday evening. The biggest meal of the week is over. The plates have been cleared, the dishwasher is humming its rhythmic cycle, and the kitchen is slowly cooling down. The air still hangs heavy with the savoury, rich scent of fried chicken, or perhaps a pan-seared steak. The family has retreated to the living room, but you remain in the kitchen for the final clean-up. You're standing at the sink, washing the easy stuff, but your eyes keep drifting to the stovetop. Sitting there on the back burner is the beast, the heavy black cast-iron skillet. It is the heart of the kitchen, a piece of metal so dense and permanent it felt like it came with the house. It is still warm, radiating a gentle heat, and the bottom is coated in a layer of grease and dark, stuck-on bits of breading or meat. In a modern kitchen, the instinct would be to squirt it with blue dish soap and scrub it with a sponge. But you know better. You know the cardinal rule of the 90s kitchen. Soap never touches the iron. Soap is the enemy. It strips the seasoning, that magical non-stick patina that your grandmother spent 30 years building up. So, you turn to the old ways. You reach into the pantry or the wire bin under the sink and pull out a raw russet potato. It feels cool and dusty in your hand. You take a knife and slice it in half, exposing the wet, starchy white interior. Next, you grab the box of kosher salt, the one with the coarse, jagged grains. You sprinkle a generous handful into the dirty pan. It looks like snow falling on black asphalt. Then, you begin the ritual. You take the half potato, cut side down, and press it into the salt. You start to scrub. You move it in firm, circular motions. Scritch, scritch, scritch. The sound is distinct, gritty and abrasive. You can feel the salt biting into the stuck-on food, lifting it away from the iron. The potato acts as a natural scouring pad, its moisture turning the salt into a thick grey paste that absorbs the grease. The potato itself starts to wear down, sacrificing itself to clean the pan. It felt incredibly primitive, didn't it? In an era where we had a chemical cleaner for everything, sprays for glass, foams for ovens, powders for carpets, This was a cleaning method that involved nothing but a vegetable and a mineral. It felt like something a pioneer would do. When you were finished, you would rinse it with hot water and dry it immediately with a towel, terrified of rust. Then you'd rub a single drop of oil into the surface until it shone like black glass. Looking at that restored skillet, smooth and ready for tomorrow's eggs, gave you a sense of deep responsibility. You weren't just washing a dish, you were maintaining an heirloom. And using a potato to do it made you feel connected to a lineage of cooks who knew that the best tools deserved the wildest forms of care. Number 21. Mixing cream cheese into scrambled eggs for extra fluffy restaurant-style eggs. It is 10:30 a.m. on a lazy Sunday. The sun is high and bright, streaming through the kitchen window and warming the back of your neck. The Sunday paper is spread out on the table, maybe just the comics or the circulars, and the coffee pot has already been drained once. It is brunch time. Not a quick bowl of cereal before school, but a meal that is meant to be an event. You're standing at the stove with a frying pan and a carton of eggs. You have a goal. You want to recreate those eggs you had at that diner or the fancy hotel buffet on vacation. The ones that were impossibly yellow, soft and piled high like clouds. You know the ones, but usually when you make them at home they turn out fine. They get a little rubbery. They weep water on the plate. They are just eggs. But today, you have a secret weapon. You reach into the fridge and pull out the silver foil brick. Cream cheese. It was usually reserved for bagels or cheesecakes, but you saw someone do this on a morning talk show or read it in a magazine while waiting at the dentist. It felt decadent, almost illegal, to put something so rich into something so simple. You crack the eggs into a bowl and whisk them until your wrist hurts. Then, you take a knife and slice off a chunk of the cold white block. You cube it into small, uneven pieces and drop them into the yellow liquid. They don't dissolve, they just float there, looking lumpy and strange. You pour the mixture into the hot buttered pan. Sizzle. As you push the eggs around with your spatula, the magic happens. The yellow curds start to form, but the white cubes of cream cheese begin to melt. They don't disappear completely. They turn into pockets of molten cream. They streak through the eggs, preventing them from drying out, adding a heaviness and a luxury that milk alone could never achieve. When you finally slide them onto the plate, they don't look like regular scrambled eggs. They are glossy. They are vibrant. They hold their shape in a soft, trembling mound. Do you remember that first bite? It was a revelation. You got the savoury taste of the egg, and then a hit of tangy, warm creaminess that coated your mouth. It tasted expensive. It tasted like you knew what you were doing. In a decade where we were obsessed with restaurant-style everything, from salsa to tortilla chips, this was the hack that actually delivered. It made you feel like a sous chef in your own pajamas, turning a $3 carton of eggs into a 5-star meal. Number 22. Saving Parmesan rinds in the freezer to add depth to soups and sauces. It is a chilly Tuesday evening in early March. The wind is rattling the window panes just slightly, making the warmth of the kitchen feel even more essential. You have just finished making a pasta dinner, maybe spaghetti with meat sauce or a simple fettuccine. You're standing at the counter with the box grater, the 4-sided metal tower that always seemed difficult to clean. In your hand is the end of the Parmesan wedge. It isn't the green canister of powdered cheese. It is the real deal, a triangular block with the hard, pale yellow rind stamped with dotted letters. You have grated it down to the very nub, risking your knuckles against the sharp metal teeth to get every last shred. Now you're left with just that hard, waxy outer shell. It looks like a stone. It feels inedible. In a different house, this would go straight into the trash. It looks like garbage, but you know the secret. You walk over to the freezer and pull out a dedicated Ziploc bag. Inside, there are already 2 or 3 of these hard, lonely rinds rattling around like pale stones. You toss the new one in and seal it up. It feels like you are collecting fossils. Fast forward 2 weeks. It is a rainy Sunday, soup weather. You have a massive stock pot on the stove filled with chopped vegetables, beans and broth. It is going to be a minestrone, or perhaps a white bean and kale soup. It smells good, but it's missing something. It lacks weight. You go to the freezer and retrieve one of those frozen rinds. You walk back to the stove and drop it into the simmering liquid. Plop. It disappears under the surface of the broth. You put the lid on and walk away. For the next 2 hours, while the soup bubbles gently, a ghost is released into the pot. As the rind softens in the heat, it doesn't melt away completely. Instead, it releases oils and salt. It gives up its spirit. When you finally take the lid off to serve dinner, the kitchen smells different. It smells richer, nuttier. You fish out the rind, now soft, chewy and pale, and discard it. Its job is done. But when you take that first spoonful of soup, the difference is undeniable. It tastes like it was cooked by an Italian grandmother who spent all day tending the fire. There is a depth to the broth, a savoury, salty richness that you can't quite put your finger on, but you feel in your soul. It was a trick that made you feel incredibly clever. You had taken something that was literally the hard, inedible refuse of a meal and turned it into the most important ingredient in the pot. It was zero-waste cooking before that was even a buzzword, just pure, practical kitchen magic. Number 23. Using an empty ketchup bottle as a pancake batter dispenser for perfect circles. It is 9 a.m. on a bright Sunday morning. The kitchen is lively, filled with the sound of cartoons drifting in from the living room and the smell of melting butter. You have decided to be the hero of the morning. You're making pancakes. You have the big electric griddle plugged in on the counter, its black surface radiating heat. But you know the struggle that lies ahead. You have the heavy ceramic mixing bowl filled with pale, lumpy batter. Usually this process is a mess. You use a ladle or a soup spoon to transfer the batter to the hot surface. It drips, it trails across the counter, and when the batter hits the pan, it spreads out into weird, uneven amoeba shapes. You end up with one giant pancake that touches its neighbour, creating a conjoined mess that is impossible to flip. But today, you are prepared. Standing next to the stove is a plastic bottle. It used to hold ketchup, maybe the classic red one, or the clear plastic squeeze bottle that you meticulously washed out last week. You had used a funnel to pour the batter inside, transforming this condiment container into a precision instrument. You unscrew the cap, point the nozzle at the hot griddle, and give it a squeeze. The batter comes out in a perfect controlled stream. You draw a circle on the hot surface. Then you fill it in. You stop squeezing, and the flow cuts off instantly. There are no drips. There are no trails. You look down and see 3 perfectly round, identical circles sizzling away. But the real magic was the creativity it unlocked. Suddenly, you weren't just a cook, you were an artist. You could draw initials. You could make a Mickey Mouse head with 3 distinct circles. You could draw a heart. The squeeze bottle gave you the control of a pen. Do you remember the feeling of flipping those pancakes? Because they were perfectly round and uniform, the spatula slid under them easily. They flipped with a satisfying flop, revealing a golden brown surface that looked like it came from a professional diner. It was a simple act of reusing trash, taking an empty bottle destined for the recycling bin and giving it a second life. It turned the messy, chaotic ordeal of Pancake Sunday into an assembly line of perfection. And the best part? If you had leftover batter, you didn't have to cover a bowl with plastic wrap. You just screwed the orange cap back on the ketchup bottle and put it in the fridge door, ready for a quick breakfast on Tuesday morning. It was efficient, it was fun, and it made you feel like a master of the griddle. Number 24. Microwaving crystallized honey for 30 seconds to return it to liquid form. It is a rainy afternoon, maybe a Tuesday. The house feels a little damp and chilly, and you have just come in from school or work shaking off a wet umbrella. You want something comforting. You put the kettle on the stove, listening to the water begin its slow boil, and reach for the box of tea bags in the cupboard. You're picturing a hot mug with a squeeze of lemon and a generous drizzle of honey. You reach for the plastic bear. Everyone had one. He sat on the shelf with his little yellow hat, a friendly face in the pantry lineup. But when you grab him, he feels wrong. He is hard. He is unyielding. You unscrew the cap and look inside. The golden viscous liquid is gone. In its place is a solid, opaque mass of sugar crystals. It looks like amber rock candy. You try to squeeze the bear, but the plastic just crinkles and resists. You try to jam a spoon in there, but the opening is too small, and the spoon just bends against the solid wall of sugar. It feels like a betrayal. The honey isn't gone, it's just locked away, inaccessible. In the past, you might have thrown it out thinking it had gone bad. But you know the trick. You take the cap off, always take the cap off, or the bear might explode, and place the plastic bottle in the microwave. You punch in 3, 0, start. You watch the bear spin. It looks a little silly, this plastic mascot revolving in the yellow light. But as the seconds tick down, you can see the change happening. The opaque sandy colour starts to clear. The solid mass begins to slump. When the beep sounds, you reach in. The bottle is warm, you give it a little shake and the movement is fluid. The crystals have vanished. The honey is back to being liquid gold, but now it is better. It is hot. You pour it into your tea, and because it is warm, it dissolves instantly. It doesn't sink to the bottom in a cold blob. It swirls into the water, sweetening it perfectly. There was a strange satisfaction in resurrecting that honey. It felt like you had reversed the aging process. You took something that had turned into a rock and, with just a little bit of radiation, turned it back into something flowing and alive. It was a reminder that in the kitchen, things were rarely as permanent as they seemed. A little bit of heat could fix almost anything, saving the day and your afternoon tea. Number 25. Storing potatoes with apples to prevent them from sprouting too quickly. It is a chilly Thursday evening in late November. The sun has gone down early, leaving the kitchen windows dark and reflective. You're preparing dinner, something hearty to combat the cold outside. Maybe a pot roast or a shepherd's pie. You need potatoes. You walk over to the pantry or open the dark cupboard under the sink, the one that always smells faintly of dust, onions and dry earth. You reach for the 10-pound bag of russets, the one with the mesh window. But as you pull a potato out, you recoil slightly. It has happened again. The potato isn't smooth and brown. It is covered in eyes. Long, pale, alien-looking sprouts are twisting out of the skin, reaching blindly into the darkness of the cupboard. It looks like a science fiction experiment gone wrong. Dealing with sprouted potatoes was a specific kind of kitchen chore. You had to take your peeler or a paring knife and gouge out these growths, leaving the potato looking scarred and pockmarked. It was tedious, and the potato itself often felt soft and tired, its energy spent on growing those useless vines. But then you learned the trick. You learned that potatoes get lonely. You reach into the fruit bowl on the counter and pick up a single apple. It doesn't matter if it's a Red Delicious or a Granny Smith. You take that bright, shiny fruit and drop it into the dark bag of brown tubers. You roll the top of the bag down and put it back in the dark. It felt like a strange pairing, like putting a diamond in a coal bin. But the science was real. The apple released a gas that acted as a sedative for the potatoes, telling them to sleep, to stay dormant, to stop growing. Do you remember opening that bag weeks later? The difference was startling. You would reach in, expecting the usual tangle of sprouts, but instead your hand would find firm, smooth potatoes. And there, in the middle of them, was the apple. It might look a little wrinkled now, a little tired, but it had done its job. There was something incredibly wholesome about this trick. It didn't involve plastic wrap or special containers. It was just nature regulating nature. It felt like old-world wisdom, something a farmer would know brought into the suburban kitchen. It turned the dark, neglected corner of the pantry into a place of balance, ensuring that when you needed a potato, it was ready for you, firm, fresh, and sprout-free. Number 26. Using a muffin tin to serve condiments at backyard BBQs without multiple bowls. It is 5 p.m. on the 4th of July, or perhaps just a particularly beautiful Saturday in mid-July. The sun is beginning its long, slow descent, casting long shadows across the grass, but the heat is still radiating from the patio. The air is thick with the specific perfume of summer, cut grass, bug spray, and the unmistakable acrid sweet smell of lighter fluid hitting charcoal. The backyard is buzzing. There are neighbours leaning over the fence, kids chasing fireflies that haven't quite lit up yet, and a cooler filled with ice and soda cans sweating in the heat. You are in charge of the setup. The picnic table is covered in a plastic tablecloth, maybe checkered red and white, held down by metal clips to stop it from flapping in the breeze. You bring out the stack of paper plates and the plastic forks. But then comes the logistical nightmare, the condiments. You need ketchup, mustard, relish, onions, pickles, and maybe some jalapenos for the brave souls. Usually this meant a parade of glass jars and squeeze bottles. The table would be cluttered with half-empty containers. Lids would get lost. A gust of wind would knock over the plastic mustard bottle. Flies would hover around the sticky rims. It was messy, and it took up all the space where people were supposed to eat. But you have a better plan. You go into the kitchen and pull out the muffin tin. It's the old heavy metal one, usually stained with the ghosts of blueberry muffins past. But today, it isn't for baking. You walk out to the table with this single metal tray. You start to fill the cups, squirt, a pool of bright red ketchup in the top left, squirt, a pool of yellow mustard next to it. You spoon green relish into the third, then diced onions, sliced pickles, and sauerkraut. Suddenly, you have created an artist's palette of flavours. It looks colourful, organised, and incredibly efficient. Do you remember the reaction when you set it down next to the grill? It was a showstopper. People would stop in the burger line and point. "Why didn't I think of that?" they would ask. It felt like a stroke of genius. And the best part was the stability. That heavy metal pan wasn't going anywhere. The wind couldn't blow it over. It was a sturdy, centralised station for building the perfect hot dog. There was a tactile joy in it too. Dipping your spoon into those little wells felt cleaner than digging into a jar. And when the party was over, clean-up was a breeze. You didn't have to wipe down 6 sticky bottles and find their caps. You just washed one pan. It was a moment of hosting brilliance, turning a piece of baking equipment into the anchor of the summer party, making you the undisputed king or queen of the backyard cookout. Number 27. Keeping a designated bacon grease jar on the stove for flavouring vegetables. It is 10:30 a.m. on a Sunday morning. The rush of breakfast is over. The plates are stacked in the sink, smeared with egg yolk and crumbs, and the house is filled with that heavy, lingering scent that is unmistakably Sunday. The smell of fried bacon. It hangs in the air, a smoky, salty perfume that wakes you up better than any alarm clock. You're cleaning up the stove. The heavy frying pan is sitting there, cooling down. Inside there is a pool of translucent golden liquid, speckled with tiny dark bits of pepper and cured meat. In a modern kitchen, this might be seen as waste, something to be wiped out with paper towels and thrown away, or carefully disposed of to avoid clogging the drain. But you know better. That isn't waste. It is liquid gold. You reach to the back of the stovetop behind the salt shaker and the pepper grinder. There sits the vessel. Maybe it is an old glass pickle jar with the label soaked off, or perhaps a metal coffee can covered with a piece of aluminum foil secured by a rubber band. It is greasy to the touch, a permanent resident of the kitchen. You pick up the heavy skillet, tilting it carefully. You hold your breath, steadying your hand, and pour the warm liquid fat into the jar. It flows smoothly, joining the layers from last week and the week before. Do you remember watching it settle? As it cooled, it would transform. It went from a clear golden liquid to a solid, creamy white substance like savoury butter. It was a visual record of breakfast past, and then came Tuesday night. You were making green beans, or maybe collard greens, or just frying up some potatoes. They looked boring. They looked plain. You would reach for that jar on the back of the stove. You would take a spoon and scoop out a dollop of that white solidified magic. Sizzle. The moment it hit the hot pan, it melted back into oil, releasing that smoky Sunday morning smell all over again. Using that grease wasn't just about being frugal, though that was part of it. It was about flavour. It was the secret ingredient that made your grandmother's green beans taste better than anyone else's. It added a depth, a meatiness, and a richness that butter or vegetable oil could never touch. It was a time before we were terrified of every gram of fat, where we understood that if you had something delicious, you saved it, you stored it, and you used it to make the rest of the week taste just a little bit like Sunday. Number 28. Freezing leftover wine in ice cube trays for cooking sauces and stews. It is 11:30 p.m. on a Saturday. The dinner party is over. The last guests have put on their coats, said their long goodbyes in the doorway, and driven away into the night. The house is suddenly very quiet. The air is warm and still smells of roast beef, candlelight, and laughter. You're in the kitchen, surveying the aftermath. The counter is a landscape of dirty plates stacked high, crumpled linen napkins and wine glasses with lipstick stains on the rim. You're tired, ready for bed, but you're doing the final sweep before turning out the lights. You pick up the bottles from the table. There is a green glass bottle of red wine, maybe a Merlot or a Cabernet, something your parents brought out for the special occasion. You give it a shake. There is still about a cup left at the bottom. In a moment of exhaustion, you might be tempted to pour it down the sink. It's not enough for another full glass, and you know that if you just shove the cork back in and leave it on the counter, it will turn to vinegar by Tuesday. It feels like a waste pouring that deep red liquid down the drain, watching it swirl away. But you have a better idea. You open the freezer and pull out an empty ice cube tray. You bring it to the counter. With a steady hand, you pour the dark, ruby-red liquid into the white plastic squares. It gurgles softly as it leaves the bottle. You fill 4, maybe 5 slots. The contrast of the dark wine against the white tray looks striking, almost like a chemistry experiment. You slide the tray back into the freezer, balancing it carefully on top of the frozen peas so it doesn't spill. Fast forward to a chaotic Wednesday evening. You're making a quick pasta sauce. You're browning some hamburger meat and onions, dumping in a jar of tomato sauce. It looks fine. It smells okay. But you want it to taste like Saturday night. You go to the freezer. You pop out one of those dark red cubes. It isn't frozen as hard as ice. It has a slightly softer, slushier texture because of the alcohol. You drop it into the bubbling sauce. Hiss. It melts instantly, swirling a deep purple ribbon into the red tomato. As the alcohol cooks off, the smell hits you. That rich, complex aroma of grapes and oak. Suddenly, your simple weeknight dinner has depth. It has history. Do you remember how professional that felt? It was a trick you might have seen on a cooking show, back when the Food Network was just starting to change how we ate. It made you feel like a chef who understood the value of ingredients. You weren't just saving 50 cents worth of wine, you were banking flavour. You were saving a little piece of the celebration to brighten up a dull weeknight, turning the end of one meal into the beginning of another. Number 29. Adding a slice of bread to the container of homemade cookies to keep them soft. It is a quiet Monday afternoon. The house is empty, and the only sound is the ticking of the clock in the hallway. On the kitchen counter sits the ceramic cookie jar. Maybe it's shaped like a bear, a goose, or just a classic heavy stoneware crock with a blue stripe. It is filled with the remnants of the weekend's baking project. You spent Sunday afternoon mixing dough, chopping nuts, and filling the house with the intoxicating scent of chocolate chips and vanilla. You walk by and lift the heavy lid, craving a snack. You reach in and pull out a cookie, but as your fingers close around it, you feel a distinct firmness. It isn't the soft, chewy, melt-in-your-mouth texture you had yesterday. The air has gotten to them. They are starting to turn into hard, crunchy discs. It is the tragedy of home baking. Without all the preservatives of the store-bought brands, your hard work has a shelf life of about 24 hours before it starts to decline. But you remember the wisdom passed down from your grandmother, or perhaps a tip you read in a Hint from Heloise column in the Sunday paper. You don't despair. You go to the bread box. You pull out the loaf of white sandwich bread, the soft, squishy kind that sticks to the roof of your mouth. You take a single slice, usually the heel that no one wants to eat anyway. It feels light and airy in your hand. You open the cookie jar again and gently lay the slice of bread right on top of the stack of cookies. It looks ridiculous. It looks like you're making a cookie sandwich. It feels wrong to mix savoury yeast bread with sweet confection, but you trust the process. You put the heavy ceramic lid back on and walk away. Fast forward to Tuesday. You come home from school or work needing a pick-me-up. You head straight for the jar. You lift the lid. The first thing you notice is the slice of bread. It has undergone a complete transformation. It is now rock hard. It is curled up at the edges, dry as a bone, like a piece of toast that was left out in the sun. It feels like a crouton. But then, you reach beneath it to the cookies. You pick one up, and it bends. It is soft. It is pliable. It feels like it just came out of the oven an hour ago. The bread had performed a noble sacrifice. Through the magic of osmosis, it had given up all of its moisture to the sugar in the cookies, reviving them, keeping them in that perfect, chewy state of grace. Do you remember the feeling of eating that cookie? It was a triumph over time. You had cheated the natural decaying process of baked goods, and there was something strangely touching about the dried-up piece of bread left behind. You would toss it in the trash with a sense of gratitude. It was a simple scientific exchange that happened in the dark of the cookie jar, a silent guardian ensuring that the love you put into baking didn't go to waste. Number 30. Using crushed cornflakes mixed with melted butter as a quick casserole topping. It is 6 p.m. on a dark, blustery Tuesday evening. The kitchen is a beacon of warmth against the cold night. You're making the ultimate comfort food, a casserole. It might be tuna noodle, or funeral potatoes with hash browns and cheese, or perhaps a chicken divan. The dish is assembled in your favourite 9x13 glass baking dish. It looks creamy, rich, and pale. It looks good, but it looks a little soft. It lacks a certain excitement. You know that if you put it in the oven just like this, it will taste fine, but the texture will be uniform. It needs a crown. It needs a crunch to contrast with all that cream of mushroom soup. You walk to the pantry and bypass the breadcrumbs. You reach for the giant economy-sized box on the bottom shelf, the one with the green rooster on the front. Cornflakes. They were usually the boring breakfast option, the one you ate only when the sugary cereals were gone. But at dinner time, they became the star. You pour a generous mound of the golden flakes into a bowl, or maybe into a Ziploc bag if you want to keep your hands clean. Then comes the best part. You crush them, crunch, crackle. You don't want dust, you want shards. You want jagged little pieces of golden corn. Next, you take a stick of butter that you melted in the microwave. You pour that liquid gold over the crushed cereal. You mix it with a fork. The dry, rustling sound changes to a wet, heavy sound as the flakes absorb the fat. They turn a deeper, darker shade of yellow. They glisten. You sprinkle this mixture over the top of the casserole. It covers the pale, creamy noodles like a blanket of gold coins. You slide it into the oven. 20 minutes later, the smell that fills the kitchen is intoxicating. It smells like toasted butter and savoury corn. When you pull the dish out, the transformation is complete. The top is a bubbling, browned landscape of pure texture. Do you remember that first bite? Your fork broke through the shattered, buttery crust to get to the soft, creamy filling underneath. The contrast was perfect. It was the sound of a home-cooked meal. This simple trick was the epitome of 90s cooking. It was about taking what we had, a box of breakfast cereal, and reimagining it. It was about realizing that with enough melted butter, even the plainest ingredient could become something luxurious. It was the final touch that turned a humble Tuesday night dinner into a feast, proving once again that the best secrets weren't found in a gourmet cookbook, but right there on the shelf of your own pantry. Kitchen nostalgia, 90s hacks. Number 31. Microwaving sponges for 1 minute to sanitize them instead of buying new ones. It is 10 a.m. on a cleaning day, likely a Saturday. The house is filled with the aggressive chemical scent of lemon furniture polish and bleach. The windows are open to let the breeze in, flapping the curtains, and the radio is playing a top 40 countdown in the background to make the work go faster. You are deep in the zone, scrubbing the counters, wiping down the stove, moving with a frantic energy to get the chores done so the weekend can actually begin. You reach for the sponge sitting in its little ceramic dish or wire cradle by the sink. It's the classic yellow rectangle with the green scrubby top. But as you bring it to your nose, you hesitate. It smells. It has that distinct sour odour of mildew and dampness. It feels slightly slimy to the touch, heavy with old water. In a moment of frustration, your instinct is to toss it in the trash under the sink. It feels contaminated, but you stop. You look at it. The sponge is physically intact. It isn't falling apart, it's just tired. Throwing it away feels wasteful, a defeat against the simple economics of the household. So, you turn to the science of the microwave. You soak the sponge under the tap, making sure it is dripping wet. You know the danger of a dry sponge in there. You place the sodden yellow brick right in the centre of the glass turntable. It looks absurd putting a cleaning tool inside the appliance you use for popcorn. You shut the door and punch in 100 start. For the next minute, you stand there with your hands on your hips watching it spin. You can see the water inside the sponge begin to boil. Steam starts to fog up the window of the microwave door. It feels like you are performing an exorcism. You are nuking the invisible enemies, the bacteria that have taken up residence in the yellow foam. When the timer beeps, you open the door and a cloud of hot, moist air rolls out. It smells intensely of nothing. The sourness is gone, replaced by the scent of pure, scalded heat. You have to be careful. You reach in, maybe with a pair of tongs or a towel, because that sponge is nuclear hot. It is radiating heat. You drop it into the sink to cool, watching the steam rise off it in waves. Do you remember the satisfaction of squeezing it out once it cooled down? It felt tighter, cleaner. It was a small resurrection. You hadn't just saved $1 on a new pack of sponges. You had won a microscopic battle. You had used the power of radiation to reset the clock, giving that humble kitchen workhorse a second lease on life, ready to scrub another day. Number 32. Storing fresh ginger root in the freezer and grating it while frozen. It is 6:45 p.m. on a Wednesday. You're trying to be adventurous. You're making a stir-fry. attempting to replicate the flavours of the takeout place down the street in your own electric stove kitchen. The wok, or the deepest frying pan you own, is heating up, and the counter is scattered with chopped broccoli, sliced peppers, and strips of chicken. You're following a recipe that calls for fresh ginger, an ingredient that always felt a little exotic and intimidating in the produce aisle. Usually this is where the trouble begins. You remember past attempts with room temperature ginger. The root would be soft and rubbery from sitting in the crisper drawer too long. You would try to peel it, losing half the flesh, and then try to grate it. It would turn into a fibrous, stringy mess that clogged the holes of your box grater, leaving you with a handful of wet hair-like fibres and very little flavour. It was a chore that made you want to just reach for the jar of powder instead. But not tonight. Tonight you open the freezer door. Tucked away in a small plastic baggie is a knobby brown root. It looks like a stone. It is frozen solid. You take it out and hold it. It is cold and hard, unrecognisable as a plant. You don't even bother peeling it because the skin is frozen tight. You take your microplane or the fine side of the grater and run the frozen root across the metal teeth. Rasp, rasp, rasp. The sound is different. It is crisp and dry. Instead of a wet mash, a fine snow-like powder falls onto the cutting board. It piles up in a fluffy golden mound. There are no strings. There is no clogging. The frozen structure of the root makes it shatter perfectly against the blade, turning into something that looks like ginger dust. As it sits on the board, it begins to thaw almost instantly, releasing a scent that is sharp, peppery, and incredibly fresh. It smells like lemon and earth, cutting through the heavy smell of heating oil. Do you remember sweeping that pile of ginger snow into the hot pan? It hissed and vanished, melting into the oil and infusing the entire dish instantly. It was a revelation. You realised you never had to throw away a shriveled piece of ginger again. By keeping it in the freezer, you had paused its life cycle at the perfect moment, turning a difficult, fibrous ingredient into a convenience food that was always ready, waiting in the cold to add a spark of heat to your Wednesday night. Number 33. Using a bundt pan to perfectly hold a beer can chicken on the grill. It is 5:30 p.m. on a Saturday in late June. The air is heavy and still, smelling of charcoal smoke and cut grass. You're in the backyard, standing next to the kettle grill. You're attempting the recipe that took the 90s by storm, the beer can chicken. The concept is simple, almost primal. Steaming a whole bird from the inside out using a half-full can of cheap domestic lager. But you know the flaw in the design. You're holding the raw chicken, which is perched precariously on the metal can. You try to balance it on the grill grate. It wobbles. It threatens to tip over, spilling beer onto the coals and ruining the fire. It feels like a high-stakes game of Jenga played with poultry. You envision opening the lid in an hour to find the bird lying on its side, burnt on one wing and raw on the other. That is when you run back into the kitchen and dig through the baking cabinet. You pull out the bundt pan, the heavy fluted metal ring usually reserved for coffee cakes or gelatin moulds. You walk back outside. You place the open beer can right in the centre hole of the pan. It fits perfectly. Then you lower the chicken onto it. The bird sits upright, proud and stable, anchored by the pan's centre cone. But you don't stop there. In the empty trough around the chicken, the part where the cake batter usually goes, you dump chopped potatoes, carrots and onions. You place the whole contraption on the grill and close the lid. An hour later you lift the lid and the sight is glorious. The chicken is standing tall, golden brown and crispy on all sides because it never touched the grate. But the real magic is in the moat. The fat from the bird has dripped down into the pan, basting the vegetables in savoury, smoky juices. They're roasting in the drippings, bubbling away. Do you remember carrying that pan to the picnic table? It looked like a medieval feast. It was a triumph of engineering. You had taken a pan designed for delicate sweets and repurposed it for the most rugged, smoky meal of the summer. It was stable, it was mess-free, and it made you feel like a genius who had hacked the very laws of grilling. Number 34. Adding instant pudding mix to cake batter for extra moisture and richness. It is 2:00 p.m. on a Friday afternoon. The kitchen counter is covered in a light dusting of white flour. You're preparing for a birthday party, or maybe just a potluck dessert. Standing before you is a box of cake mix. Yellow, chocolate, or maybe devil's food. It promises a moist and delicious result right there on the cardboard, but you know the truth. You have made these before. Sometimes they come out perfect, but sometimes they come out airy, dry, and tasting vaguely of preservatives. They crumble when you look at them. You want something better. You want a cake that feels substantial, one that sits heavy on the fork and melts in your mouth like it came from a professional bakery. You reach into the pantry for the secret weapon. It is a small, unassuming box usually sitting next to the gelatin. Instant pudding mix. You tear open the paper packet. A puff of sweet vanilla-scented dust rises into the air. You dump the powder right into the bowl with the dry cake mix, the eggs, the oil and the water. You don't make the pudding first, you just add the raw potential of it. You turn on the electric hand mixer. As the beaters whir, you can see the change happening. The batter becomes thicker. It looks glossy, almost like satin. It doesn't splash as much. It moves with a heavy, luxurious slow-motion churn. When you pour it into the greased pans, it doesn't run. It flows like lava. Fast forward 40 minutes. The timer dings. You pull the pans out of the oven and the smell is different. It is richer, denser. When you finally slice into the cooled cake to frost it, the knife meets a pleasant resistance. The crumb is tight and velvety. Do you remember the first bite? It was impossibly moist. It had a density that felt expensive. The pudding had worked its chemical magic, binding the ingredients together and locking in the moisture so that the cake would stay fresh for days, not hours. It was the ultimate cheat code, a way to take a 99-cent box mix and turn it into a dessert that people would swear you made from scratch, asking you for a recipe that didn't really exist. Number 35. Saving empty spice jars to create a matching set for bulk spice storage. It is a rainy Sunday afternoon, the kind of day that feels grey and enclosed, perfect for tackling the projects you usually ignore. You're standing in front of the pantry with the door wide open. You're staring at the spice shelf. It is a disaster zone. There are little metal tins with sliding tops that are rusted shut, plastic bags held closed with rubber bands, and mismatched bottles of oregano and basil from 3 different decades. It is visual chaos. Every time you try to find the paprika, you knock over the cumin. But you have been preparing for this moment. Under the sink, or perhaps in a box in the garage, you have been hoarding them, empty glass jars. Maybe they were baby food jars, or maybe you loyally bought the same brand of expensive spices just to get the bottles. You fill the kitchen sink with hot, soapy water. You submerge the collection. You let them soak, watching the paper labels turn dark and translucent. Then comes the satisfying part, peeling them off. You scrape away the stubborn glue with your thumbnail or a scouring pad until the glass is pristine and squeaky clean. Now, you lay them out on a kitchen towel to dry. They look beautiful in their uniformity, a regiment of clear, shining soldiers. You take those messy plastic bags of bulk spices, the ones that were cheaper but harder to store, and you begin the transfer. You might use a small paper funnel you made yourself. You pour the bright yellow turmeric, the deep red chili powder, and the green flakes of parsley into the matching jars. Then, the finishing touch. You take a permanent marker, or maybe a label maker if you are really organised, and write the names on the lids or the glass. When you line them back up on the shelf, the transformation is shocking. It looks like a pharmacy. It looks like a professional kitchen. The visual noise is gone, replaced by a calm, orderly row of colours. Do you remember the feeling of opening the pantry door just to look at them? It gave you a sense of control. In a house that was often messy and loud, this one shelf was perfect. It was a Pinterest moment before Pinterest existed, a way of curating your life using nothing but trash and a little bit of effort, proving that organisation wasn't about buying new things, but about seeing the potential in what you already had. Number 36. Using an egg slicer to quickly slice mushrooms, strawberries and cooked potatoes. It is 5:30 p.m. on a Tuesday evening. The kitchen is busy, filled with the noise of the nightly news on the small counter TV and the clatter of silverware. You're making a salad, trying to get some vegetables on the table to balance out the casserole. On the cutting board sits a carton of white button mushrooms. They are small, rubbery, and annoyingly round. You pick up a knife, intending to slice them. But you know the drill. The mushrooms are spongy. They squish under the blade unless it is razor sharp. They roll away from you. The slices come out uneven, some thick wedges, some paper-thin slivers. It is tedious work, and you have a whole pound to get through. That is when you open the gadget drawer. You rummage past the garlic press and the can opener to find the strange little contraption. It has a white plastic base with a cup-shaped indentation and a hinged arm strung with thin, tight wires. The egg slicer. It was designed for one thing: hard-boiled eggs. But you know it is destined for greater things. You take a mushroom, wipe the dirt off with a paper towel, and place it cap up in the plastic cradle. You bring the wire arm down, swing. There is a satisfying low-pitched twang as the wires pass through the fungus. It is effortless. There is no squishing. There is no rolling. You lift the arm and the mushroom falls out in a fan of perfectly uniform, identical cross-sections. They look machine-made. You move fast, load, slice, dump. You go through the entire carton in 60 seconds flat. And it didn't stop at salad. Do you remember using it for strawberries? You would hull the red berries, place them in the slicer, and instantly have a pile of beautiful red hearts to layer over a shortcake or mix into yogurt. Or using it on boiled potatoes for a salad. There was a profound sense of efficiency in repurposing that tool. You had taken a unitasker, something that only had one job, and turned it into a powerhouse of prep work. It made you feel like you had discovered a loophole in the kitchen code, bypassing the knife skills of a chef with a simple plastic hinge and a few strands of wire. Number 37. Microwaving citrus fruits briefly before zesting for easier, more fragrant zest. It is a sunny Sunday morning, and you're in a baking mood. The kitchen is already warm from the preheating oven, and the counter is lined with flour, sugar, and butter. You're making something bright, maybe lemon poppy seed muffins or a classic key lime pie. The recipe calls for 1 tablespoon of fresh zest. You stand there with a cold lemon or orange that you just pulled from the refrigerator. It feels hard as a rock. You pick up your zester. Maybe it's the fine side of that box grater that always threatens to skin your knuckles. You start to scrape. It is a struggle. The skin is tight and dry. You're getting tiny, pitiful flecks of zest, and with them, too much of the bitter white pith. The fruit is fighting you, holding on to its flavour, but you know how to wake it up. You take the whole fruit and toss it into the microwave. You don't need much time, just 10 or 15 seconds. You hit start and wait for that brief hum. When you pull the fruit out, the change is subtle but profound. It is warm in your hand. The skin feels slightly softer, more yielding. The heat has opened the pores of the rind, bringing the essential oils rushing to the surface. Now, you run it across the grater. It is a completely different experience. The zest comes off in long, lush ribbons. It doesn't stick. It falls away effortlessly. And the smell, it is explosive. Suddenly, the entire kitchen smells like a citrus grove in the heat of summer. It is a hot, perfumed cloud of lemon oil that you can taste in the air. Do you remember that moment of realizing how much flavor you had been missing? By adding just a tiny bit of heat, you had unlocked the full potential of the fruit. It wasn't just about getting the zest off. It was about releasing the soul of the ingredient. It felt like a professional trick, ensuring that your muffins wouldn't just taste sweet, but would sing with that deep aromatic citrus flavor that usually only came from a bakery. Number 38. Keeping a spray bottle of water and vinegar solution for quick kitchen cleanup. It is 8:15 p.m. on a Tuesday. Dinner is over. The plates have been cleared, the leftovers are packed away in their Tupperware coffins, and the stove is finally cooling down. You're standing in the middle of the kitchen looking at the aftermath. There are grease splatters on the stovetop from the pork chops, crumbs on the laminate counter, and a general film of activity covering every surface. You reach under the sink, bypassing the expensive, brightly coloured bottles of chemical spray. You don't want the harsh, artificial lemon scent that stings your nose, or the blue liquid that leaves streaks if you don't wipe it perfectly. Instead, you grab the generic plastic spray bottle, the one you bought for $1 at the hardware store. It is filled with a clear liquid that looks like water but smells like a pickle jar. You take aim. The mist settles over the grease and the grime. The smell hits you immediately, sharp, pungent, and acidic. It isn't a pretty smell. It smells like a salad dressing. It smells like utility. But as you wipe it away with a paper towel or a rag, the magic happens. The vinegar cuts through the grease instantly. There is no soapy residue left behind, no chemical film. The counters just squeak. They shine. And as the liquid evaporates, the sour smell vanishes completely, taking all the cooking odours with it. There was a quiet confidence in using that bottle. It felt like a secret passed down from a grandmother who lived through the Depression. It was a rejection of the marketing that told you needed a different cleaner for the glass, the counter, and the sink. You knew the truth. You knew that with a splash of vinegar and some tap water, you could clean the entire world. It was simple, It was safe, and it left your kitchen feeling not just perfumed, but truly, honestly clean. Number 39. Storing fresh asparagus upright in a glass of water like a bouquet. It is 4:30 p.m. on a Tuesday in mid-April. The weather is turning, the windows are open, letting in a cool breeze that smells of damp earth and budding leaves. You have just returned from the grocery store and the kitchen table is covered in brown bags. You're unpacking the haul. You pull out a bundle of asparagus, thick green spears held together by a tight purple rubber band. Usually this is where the mistake happens. You would normally just toss the bundle into the bottom drawer of the fridge, the vegetable graveyard, and you know what would happen. By Friday, when you finally decided to cook them, the tips would be slimy and the stalks would be limp, bending like rubber instead of snapping. But today you treat them with respect. You treat them like flowers. You walk to the cupboard and pull out a heavy drinking glass, or maybe a wide-mouth mason jar. You fill it with an inch of cold water from the tap. Then, you take the bundle of asparagus and trim the bottom inch off the stems. Snip. You place the spears upright in the glass. They stand tall and proud, drinking in the water. You open the refrigerator and clear a space on the middle shelf, pushing aside the milk and the leftovers. You place your green bouquet right there in the centre. It looked beautiful, didn't it? Every time you opened the fridge for a snack, you were greeted by this burst of vertical green life. It looked like a centerpiece, and the result was undeniable. When you pulled them out 4 days later, they were still crisp. They snapped with a loud, sharp crack. They tasted sweet and grassy, not old and tired. It was a simple shift in perspective, realizing that a vegetable was still a living thing that needed water to thrive. Storing them this way felt like a small act of reverence, ensuring that the fresh taste of spring actually made it to your plate. Number 40. Using Cool Whip containers for freezing homemade soups and leftovers. It is 8:30 p.m. on a chilly Sunday evening in January. You have just finished the marathon of making a massive batch of vegetable beef soup or chicken noodle stew. The pot is huge, taking up 2 burners, and the house smells rich, salty and comforting. The meal is over, but the pot is still half full. You're staring down the barrel of leftovers for the next 3 months. You open the designated Tupperware cabinet. It is a disaster zone. It is an avalanche of mismatched plastic. You have 50 lids and 12 bottoms, and none of them fit each other. The good containers, the ones you actually bought, are either missing stained orange from spaghetti sauce or currently holding your lunch for tomorrow. But you don't panic. You reach further back, or perhaps into a specific drawer saved for this exact moment. You pull out the stack. They are round, white and flimsy, Cool Whip containers, or maybe country crock tubs. You didn't buy these. They were free. They were the ghosts of desserts past. You had washed them out months ago, stacking them like nesting dolls, waiting for their second tour of duty. You ladle the hot soup into the thin white plastic. You feel the heat radiating through the walls instantly. They are so thin you have to be careful not to burn your hands. You snap the lids on. Click. It isn't a hermetic seal, but it is good enough. You grab a black permanent marker and scrawl Soup 198 across the top. Or, if you were feeling chaotic, you didn't write anything at all, creating a dinner roulette for your future self. You stack them in the freezer, a tower of white cylinders. There was something deeply practical about this habit. It felt like you were beating the system. Why buy expensive freezer bags when these perfectly good bowls came with the topping? And do you remember the specific disappointment or joy of opening the freezer for dessert, popping a lid and finding frozen chili instead of whipped cream? It was the classic 90s bait and switch. These containers were the workhorses of the freezer, the humble vessels that held the warmth of a Sunday night dinner safe until you needed it on a busy Tuesday in March. Number 41. Adding a splash of club soda to pancake and waffle batter for extra fluffiness. It is 9:30 a.m. on a lazy Sunday morning. The house is waking up slowly, the sun filtering through the blinds and striping the kitchen table with light. You're in the mood for a real breakfast. Not cereal, not toast, but the kind of meal that requires maple syrup and a fork. You're making pancakes or waffles. You have the bowl of batter in front of you. You've mixed the flour, the eggs and the milk. It looks fine, but you know the risk. Sometimes, despite your best efforts, they come out heavy. They sit in your stomach like lead weights. You want that impossible diner texture, the kind that is towering, light, and full of air bubbles. You reach into the back of the fridge, past the orange juice, and pull out a bottle of club soda or plain seltzer water. It was probably bought for a party and forgotten. But today, it is the secret ingredient. You measure out a splash, maybe replacing half the milk in the recipe. You unscrew the cap. Psht. The sound of the carbonation escaping is sharp and promising. You pour the clear, fizzing liquid into the heavy beige batter. Immediately, the bowl comes alive. It bubbles up, expanding and frothing as the carbon dioxide hits the mixture. You don't whisk it hard. You just fold it in, gentle and slow, trying to trap all those thousands of tiny bubbles inside the gluten. When you ladle the batter onto the hot grease skillet, the reaction is instant. The pancake rises up taller than you've ever seen. It puffs up like a soufflé. Do you remember cutting into that first stack? The fork slid through with zero resistance. Inside, the texture was like a sponge, filled with airy pockets that were waiting to drink up the syrup. It wasn't doughy. It was buoyant. Using that fizzy water felt like a magic trick, a way of injecting air directly into your breakfast. It was a simple substitution that turned a heavy weekend meal into something that felt like it was floating off the plate. Number 42. Rubbing butter on cheese blocks before storing to prevent mould. It is 4:15 p.m. on a Tuesday. The after-school hunger has set in. You're in the kitchen, searching for a snack that isn't sweet. You open the refrigerator cheese drawer, the one that always sticks a little on its tracks. Inside, among the singles and the bags of shreds, is the prize, a big rectangular block of sharp cheddar. But as you unwrap the plastic film, your heart sinks. The end of the block, the part where you sliced off pieces for sandwiches 3 days ago, has turned. It is hard, white, and dried out, looking like a callus. Or worse, there is a small, fuzzy patch of blue-green mould blooming on the corner. It is a kitchen tragedy. You have to get the knife and perform surgery, slicing off a thick slab of good cheese just to get rid of the bad part. You feel the waste in your soul, but you have a trick to stop it from happening again. You pull the butter dish from the counter. The butter is soft and room temperature. You take a knife and scrape up a small pat, just enough to cover the tip of the blade. You take that soft yellow fat and smear it directly onto the cut end of the cheese block. It feels counterintuitive, adding fat to fat. It looks a little strange, like you're frosting a cake made of dairy. But as you smooth it out, you are creating a seal. You are replacing the wax rind that was lost. You wrap the block back up in its plastic and toss it into the drawer. When you come back on Friday, the difference is miraculous. You peel back the plastic and the butter is still there, protecting the surface. You can scrape it off if you want, or just slice right through it. It's just butter and cheese after all. Underneath, the cheddar is soft, orange and fresh. There is no hard crust. There is no mould. It was a preservation method that felt like something from a pioneer cabin. A simple way to extend the life of your groceries using nothing but a little bit of butter as a shield against the air. Number 43. Using clean pantyhose as a strainer for making jelly or removing lumps from gravy. It is 10 a.m. on Thanksgiving morning, or perhaps a busy canning weekend in September. The kitchen is a zone of intense activity. Every burner is occupied, and the windows are steamed over with condensation. You're in the middle of a critical operation, making the gravy for the big meal, or perhaps straining fruit juice for jelly. You have the liquid in a pot. It smells incredible. Savoury roasted turkey drippings or sweet boiling grape juice. But there is a problem. It isn't clear. The gravy is lumpy with flour that didn't whisk in quite right, or the juice is cloudy with fruit pulp. You need a strainer, but your metal mesh strainer is too coarse. It lets all the little bits through. And cheesecloth. You ran out of that 3 years ago and never bought more because it was expensive, and you only used it once a year. You need something finer. You need something strong. You leave the kitchen and head to your dresser drawer. You pull out a fresh, unopened package. It's a pair of knee-high nylon stockings, or perhaps a pair of pantyhose that you haven't worn yet. They are sheer, beige and silky. You walk back to the kitchen and take a clean pitcher or bowl. You stretch the nylon stocking over the mouth of the vessel. It fits tight, like a drum skin. Then you pour. The hot liquid hits the nylon mesh. It doesn't melt. It holds. The weave of the fabric is microscopically fine, finer than any metal sieve you own. You watch as the liquid passes through, and the lumps, the pulp, and the debris are caught on top. When you pull the stocking away, what remains in the bowl is perfection. The gravy is silky smooth, looking like it came from a 5-star restaurant. The jelly juice is jewel bright and crystal clear. Do you remember the moment of triumph? It felt a little illicit, using a piece of clothing to cook dinner, but it worked better than any kitchen tool you owned. It was the ultimate improvisation, a moment where you looked at the problem, looked at what you had, and realised that the solution wasn't at the store but in your sock drawer. It was resourceful, it was clever, and it saved the Thanksgiving dinner from the dreaded fate of lumpy gravy. Number 44. Keeping a designated drippings bowl in the freezer for flavour bases. It is 7:30 p.m. on a Sunday. The house is quieting down after the main event. The roast chicken or the joint of beef has been stripped clean. The plates are in the dishwasher, and all that remains is the roasting pan. You bring it to the sink, heavy and awkward. At the bottom lies a pool of dark, savoury alchemy, a mixture of rendered fat, caramelised meat juices, and the softened remnants of onions and carrots. In a modern world, you might look at this and see grease. You might think about clogged arteries or clogged drains. You might reach for the paper towels to wipe it out and throw it away. But you know better. That isn't waste. That is liquid flavour. That is the soul of the meal you just ate. You open the freezer door and find the container. It sits in the back, behind the frozen peas. It isn't pretty. Maybe it's a reused margarine tub or a stained Tupperware bowl that has lost its lid. You bring it to the counter, you tilt the roasting pan, careful not to spill, and pour the warm brown liquid into the cold bowl. It hits the frozen layer from last week, maybe pork drippings or bacon grease, and begins to solidify almost instantly. You are building a geological record of your family dinners. You slide it back into the cold. Fast forward to a bleak Tuesday evening, you're making rice, or sautéing some green beans, or starting a soup. It tastes fine, but it lacks punch. It tastes thin. You remember the vault. You pull out the drippings bowl. You take a spoon and scrape up a tablespoon of that frozen savoury gold. You drop it into the hot pan. Sizzle. The smell that rises up is complex and deep. It smells like Sunday. As it melts, it infuses the simple weekday meal with the richness of a roast dinner. It adds a depth that no bouillon cube could ever match. It was a practice in flavour banking. You were saving the best part of the weekend to rescue the middle of the week. It felt thrifty, yes, but more than that, it felt like you were cheating the system, pulling a gourmet meal out of thin air using nothing but the ghosts of dinners past. Number 45. Microwaving brown sugar with a damp paper towel to soften it instantly. It is 3:00 p.m. on a gloomy Saturday afternoon. The sky outside is a flat, steely grey, and you're seized by a sudden, undeniable need to bake. You're thinking of oatmeal cookies, the kind that are chewy and smell of cinnamon, or perhaps a batch of blondies. You have the butter softening on the counter, the eggs are ready, and the oven is preheating. You reach into the pantry for the bag of dark brown sugar. But as you grab it, your heart sinks. It is a brick. It feels like a solid, fossilised rock. You must have forgotten the slice of bread trick last time, or maybe the bag had a tiny tear in it. You try to squeeze it, but it doesn't give an inch. You stand there, frustrated. You don't have time to wait overnight for a slice of bread to work its slow magic. The butter is soft now. The craving is now. That is when you remember the emergency protocol. You pull a large chunk of the rock-hard sugar out of the bag. It comes out in one solid piece, shaped exactly like the bottom of the sack. You place it in a microwave-safe bowl. Then, you take a paper towel. You run it under the kitchen faucet until it is soaked, then wring it out hard until it is just damp, moist, but not dripping. You drape this damp white flag over the top of the sugar bowl. You place it in the microwave. 20 seconds. Start. You watch it spin. It seems too simple to work. But inside that little box, the water in the paper towel is turning into steam. That steam is penetrating the hard, crystallized molasses shell of the sugar. When the beep sounds, you pull the bowl out. You peel back the warm, damp paper towel. A cloud of sweet, molasses-scented steam hits your face. You take a fork and press down on the sugar. It crumbles. It is soft, warm, and yielding. It feels like sand on a beach in July. Do you remember the relief? You hadn't just saved the cookies, you had saved your afternoon. There was no need to hack at the block with a knife or run to the store. With just a little bit of water and a few seconds of radiation, you had reversed time, turning a stone back into the sweet, soft ingredient it was meant to be. Number 46. Using a meat thermometer to check if yeast water is the right temperature. It is a quiet Sunday afternoon, and the kitchen is dusted with a light film of flour. You're attempting the holy grail of domestic baking, homemade yeast bread. Maybe it's cinnamon rolls for tomorrow's breakfast, or a simple loaf of white bread. The recipe card is sitting on the counter, and it gives you that one terrifying instruction. Dissolve yeast in warm water, 105 degrees, 110 degrees. This is the make or break moment. You stand at the sink with a measuring cup running the tap. You know the danger. If the water is too cold, the yeast won't wake up, and your dough will be a dense, heavy brick. If the water is too hot, you will kill the yeast instantly, murdering the microscopic organisms that are supposed to make your bread rise. You try the old wrist test, dripping water on the inside of your arm like you're testing a baby bottle. It feels warm. But is it too warm? Is it 100 degrees or 115? Your anxiety spikes. You're guessing, and the fate of your baking project hangs in the balance. Then, you open the silverware drawer and dig all the way to the back. You pull out the meat thermometer, the one with the round glass dial and the long metal probe, usually reserved for Thanksgiving turkeys or Sunday roasts. It feels ridiculous to use a tool designed for beef on a cup of tap water, but you stick the metal probe into the liquid. You watch the red needle swing. It settles at 120 degrees. Too hot. You add a splash of cold. The needle drops. 112. 110. 108. Perfect. You sprinkle the yeast into the cup with confidence. 5 minutes later, you look down and see the thick, creamy foam rising to the top of the cup. It's alive. It's working. Do you remember the sense of control that gave you? You weren't relying on intuition or luck anymore. You were using science. By repurposing a tool meant for the oven, you had guaranteed success before you even mixed the flour. It was a small, precise victory that turned the most stressful part of baking into the easiest. Number 47. Storing baking supplies in labelled margarine tubs for easy access. It is 11:30 a.m. on a Saturday baking marathon. You have 3 different projects going on at once: cookies, brownies, and maybe a cake. The pantry door is wide open, revealing the chaos inside. The shelves are a minefield of half-opened bags. The chocolate chips are in a torn plastic package secured by a loose rubber band that is threatening to snap. The walnuts are in a twist-tied bulk bag that feels greasy. The cocoa powder is in a tin that puffs a brown cloud every time you pry the lid off. It is messy. It is frustrating. Every time you reach for an ingredient, you risk a spill. You wish you had one of those fancy matching canister sets you see in the department store catalogues, but those cost a fortune. But you have a secret supply. You reach into the lower cabinet, the one where you keep the good garbage. You pull out a stack of plastic tubs. They're yellow or beige. They used to hold margarine, country crock, shed spread, or maybe I can't believe it's not butter. You had saved them for weeks. You scrubbed the grease out with hot, soapy water until they squeaked. You dried them on the rack until they were pristine. Now you take those unruly bags of baking supplies and pour them into the tubs. The chocolate chips rattle satisfyingly as they fill the container. The nuts fit perfectly. The brown sugar packs down tight. Then you take a thick black permanent marker. You write directly on the lid in big block letters: walnuts, choc chips, coconut. You stack them up in the pantry. Suddenly, the chaos is gone. Instead of a jumble of crinkly bags, you have a uniform wall of yellow tubs. They stack perfectly because they were designed to. They are airtight. They are free. Do you remember the feeling of snapping that lid shut? Click. It was the sound of security. It meant no spills. It meant no stale ingredients. And there was a specific thrifty pride in seeing that stack. You hadn't spent a dime on organisation, yet your pantry looked efficient and ready for action. It was the ultimate upcycling, turning the remnants of your morning toast into the infrastructure of your afternoon baking. Number 48. Adding a pinch of sugar to vegetables while cooking to bring out natural sweetness. It is 5:45 p.m. on a Tuesday. The kitchen is busy, and the smell of dinner is starting to fill the house. Maybe meatloaf, or perhaps grilled chops. On the stove, there is a smaller pot of boiling water. You're on vegetable duty. You have a bag of frozen peas, or maybe a can of corn, or perhaps some sliced carrots you prepped earlier. You know the complaint before it even happens. The kids are going to say they taste bitter, or bland. Vegetables are the battleground of the weeknight dinner, the thing you have to bargain with to get them to eat. 3 more bites of peas and you can have dessert. But you have a trick up your sleeve, a secret weapon passed down from a grandmother who knew that nature sometimes needed a little help. You dump the vegetables into the simmering water. As the steam rises, you reach for the sugar bowl. It feels wrong. Sugar belongs in cookies, not in carrots. It feels like breaking a rule of nutrition. But you take just a pinch. maybe a quarter of a teaspoon, between your thumb and forefinger. You sprinkle the white crystals into the pot. You aren't making them sweet like candy, you're just waking them up. The tiny amount of sugar dissolves instantly, countering the natural bitterness of the vegetable and amplifying its own inherent sweetness. You drain them and add a little pat of butter. The colours seem brighter. The peas are emerald green, the carrots are vibrant orange. Do you remember the taste test? You sneak a spoonful before serving. It's subtle, but it's there. The metallic taste of the can is gone. The dullness of the freezer burn is masked. They taste like they were just picked from a garden in July. When you put the bowl on the table, the reaction is quiet, but telling. The plates come back clean. There is no bargaining. It was a tiny, invisible adjustment, a pinch of white powder, that turned the healthy obligation on the plate into something that actually tasted like a treat. Number 49. Using plastic grocery bags as mini trash can liners and freezer storage. It is 5 p.m. on a Thursday. You have just returned from the weekly grocery run, the trunk of the car filled with brown paper sacks, or more likely those thin white plastic t-shirt bags. You carry them into the kitchen in bunches, the plastic handles cutting into your fingers. As you unpack, the milk, the cereal, the apples, you're left with a pile of these empty, crinkling ghosts. In a modern world, these are a nuisance. But in the 90s, they were currency. You don't throw them away. You gather them up. You stuff them into the bag of bags. That one larger bag hanging on the pantry doorknob, or stuffed into a tube made from an old soda bottle. It is a chaotic, rustling dispenser of infinite utility. You walk to the bathroom. You pull the small wicker or plastic wastebasket from under the sink. You take one of the grocery bags, fluff it open with a snap of your wrists and line the can. It fits perfectly. The handles loop over the sides like ears. It isn't elegant, but it is free. But the utility didn't stop at trash. Your freezing hamburger meat or maybe a loaf of bread. You wrap it in foil first, but you don't trust the foil alone. You reach for a bag. You slide the food inside, twist the handles and tie a knot. It is the poor man's vacuum seal. Do you remember the endless cycle? You brought them home, you stored them, and you sent them back out as liners and wrappers. It was a closed loop of plastic resourcefulness. The bag of bags was a comfort object, a sign that the house was stocked and running smoothly. It was the humble, crinkly heart of the kitchen ecosystem, ensuring that no bin went unlined and no leftover went unprotected. Number 50. Keeping a recipe binder with magazine clippings protected in plastic sheet protectors. It is 2 p.m. on a sleepy Sunday afternoon. The weather outside is miserable, maybe sleet or a cold, driving rain, which makes the warmth of the living room feel like a gift. You're sitting on the floor at the kitchen table surrounded by a mess of glossy paper. You have a stack of magazines, Good Housekeeping, Taste of Home, Family Circle and Southern Living. They are dog-eared and well-loved. You also have a pair of scissors, a 3-ring binder, maybe one covered in fabric or a generic white vinyl one, and a box of clear plastic sheet protectors. This is your personal internet. This is your Pinterest board, long before the internet existed. You flip through the pages until you find it, that picture of the perfect death by chocolate cake, or the impossible quiche. You carefully cut it out, trying to keep the edges straight. You trim away the ads for cigarettes or carpet cleaner until you're left with just the instructions and that mouth-watering photo. You slide the clipping into the plastic sleeve. Swish. It fits perfectly. The plastic is smooth and cool under your fingers. You snap the rings of the binder open, clack, and add the new page to your collection. This binder is a living document. It has sections for casseroles, desserts, and holiday. It is heavy with potential. But the true genius of the system wasn't just the organisation, it was the armour. Do you remember cooking from this binder on a messy Tuesday? You would lay it open on the counter next to the mixing bowl. A splash of milk would fly out. A dollop of tomato sauce would land right on the recipe. In a regular cookbook, that page would be ruined, stained forever. But here, you just took a damp sponge and wiped the plastic sheet. The sauce vanished. The recipe underneath remained pristine, safe in its little force field. Holding that binder felt like holding a legacy. It was a curated collection of everything you hoped to be as a cook. It wasn't just data, it was a physical artifact of your tastes, a scrapbook of meals you had made and meals you dreamed of making, all protected in plastic, ready to withstand the chaos of a real working kitchen. And there we have it, 50 small acts of domestic ingenuity. Looking back at this list, from the frozen coffee cubes to the magazine clippings and sheet protectors, it's clear that the 90s kitchen wasn't just a place to cook, it was a laboratory of resourcefulness. We didn't have apps to tell us what to do or endless online tutorials. We had community wisdom, trial and error, and a deep-seated belief that anything, even a stale bag of brown sugar or a lonely end of cheese, could be saved if you just knew the trick. It was a time when hacking didn't mean coding. It meant using a bundt pan to roast a chicken or a slice of bread to save your cookies. These weren't just shortcuts. They were small victories against waste and chaos, little moments of control in a busy world. I hope you enjoyed this trip down memory lane. Let me know if there's anything else you'd like to explore.